Hello, and welcome back to the Two Button Crew podcast. I'm your host, Glen, and I am joined by Scott Campbell.
Hey, Glen.
And Nathan Blake of Nathan Blake Games.
Howdy-o, everyone.
Hi, Nathan.
And today is a very special episode because, for a few reasons. First of all, we're talking about Nintendo's newest epic, the Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. A hotly anticipated game that has been in the works for years, probably 6 years. And the second thing about this episode is that it is the final episode of the Two Button Crew podcast.
Aww.
Yes, and probably, in fact, the last Two Button Crew thing. I don't anticipate any blog entries after this, any more YouTube videos, really. This is actually a pretty fitting grand finale, not only for the podcast because it bookends a podcast which started with talking about Breath of the Wild on episode 1. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, I knew it.
It's like an Ouroboros, like the one in the logo for Tears of the Kingdom. It just works on multiple levels.
Yes. Just as Skyward Sword was not the last Wii game, but it does kind of feel like the bookend of that generation, I think this game is also going to feel like the kind of culmination of the Switch generation, and it's a very high note for Two Button Crew to go out on as well, but we'll talk about that more at the end of the episode too.
Mm-hmm. So, anyway, let's get right into it. And the thing about Tears of the Kingdom is because we have been waiting so long about it, I think it's only fair to talk about some of the anticipation leading into this. And we're not going to go into too much detail because we had an entire episode that was just our wish list for the game, if you want to go back and listen to that. But we're going to talk a little bit about the purchasing options and stuff like that. And, well, do you have any, before we do talk about actually purchasing the games, do you want to talk about any of the pre-release stuff, recap it, or give your opinions on it?
I was pretty pleased with the fandom being patient with this one. Nintendo did several delays, so it's supposed to come out in, I don't know when they said 2020 and then 2021, and just year after year, a new release window that was pushed further back. And I feel like we have a pretty good pulse now on not getting our hopes up and having an understanding that, the game is probably not ready yet, because I think we would see its progress or lack of what they would show us. We've only seen however much. We've only seen a 2-minute trailer. Therefore, I think it's not actually going to come out in 2021. So overall, I feel like the fans had a good level of expectation and were patient with the developers and didn't rush them. I feel like that translated to the developers as well, getting to take their time and really not crunch and have all the time they needed to kind of perfect it and put everything in it that they wanted to, so much so that they don't have any ideas left for DLC.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering the fact that it was originally going to be DLC, and then they just had so many great ideas that they were just like, you know what, a whole entire game. That kind of creates a situation where you do have to kind of be patient with it, because they were not trying to create a window for a full game to be made. They were trying to fit in DLC content into the game that already existed. And so, the fact that we were able to just kind of give them time, and get such a good product out of it is pretty good, because it'd be one thing if we had done that knowing that a full game was going to come out. But since we were just kind of hanging out waiting, and then they finally were like, and there's a sequel eventually, maybe, but it was going to be DLC, so it's going to take a while. I think that, like you say, it does reflect well on how they handled it, and how the fans handled it. It struck a good happy medium, because there's obviously been plenty of games over the last couple of years that came out that were just a horrible, broken mess when they released, and people were very upset. And many of those games took a long time. Yep. And many of those games took a long time to come out, And so people were also disappointed, but if they had given the time that was needed to actually make a working game, instead of complaining that it wasn't out yet, and then also complaining that it was broken when it came out, then, it might have been a more successful endeavor. So this is the sweet spot.
Yeah. I don't know. I seem to recall some of the fans being a little bit anxious about how little we heard about it leading in. And that kind of eventually did gradually morph into an appreciation for not spoiling a lot of the game because, Breath of the Wild, they revealed a lot about that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, the fans have been pretty patient, all things considered. It took 6 years for us to get a new mainline Zelda game.
Well, it helps that Nintendo's only making games for one system now, so the release lineup is filled out with all of the team's output, and we're getting hit after hit after hit. Most Switch gamers that I know have a backlog, so it's not like we're itching and desperate for Nintendo to finish whatever's next on their development pipeline.
Yeah, it's kind of like whenever a YouTuber says, "Hey, sorry I haven't uploaded in 2 months," or whatever, and it's like, what? Oh, yeah, I subscribe to you.
Right.
I have other stuff that I can do. Like, this is more of a problem for you and your revenue stream than it is for me.
Yep.
But, yeah, so, okay, let's talk about, the game is released. There's a lot of purchasing options. Scott, I think you have some things to say about this.
Yeah, Nintendo gave us a lot of opportunities to empty our pockets and perhaps even break open some piggy banks. So, of course, we get to always choose between digital and physical. There was a collector's edition again. This time I felt like the offerings in the collector's edition were not as compelling as the Breath of the Wild ones. I wish that I would have bought the Breath of the Wild ones, like the Master Sword that Ryan, member of the crew, got back on Breath of the Wild release day. But this one, I didn't feel like really justified its price, so I did not go for that. I got a pre-order bonus from GameStop, which was like a sleeve you can put on your arm.
Yours is way cooler pre-order bonus than mine. Mine was like a wooden cutting board that was this big.
Hey, I wanted that, and I will trade you. There was a Link amiibo at the time, really good detail. And Ganondorf and Zelda came out later. I got those. I actually sprung for the Zelda console, and I kept it in the box because I'm a crazy collector now. I've turned into a Nintendo collector, and I have always thought, like, people who had the extra money and the restraint to keep a spare console in the box are the smartest people because they end up being worth so much. So I've got that in the closet. I'm not as hopeful about its future because of the fact that it's got batteries in it. But we'll see. Somebody will probably want it in 10 years. And then one thing that I was also thrilled about around the release of Tears of the Kingdom is that Nintendo Force put out a good Tears of the Kingdom cover story with the reverse of it being a spoof magazine. It said Hyrule Health. And it was Ganondorf looking very manly and macho. So that was a great piece that they did.
Yeah. So I guess while we're talking about the purchase and all of that, there is one thing that I just want to go on quickly, and it's that the game was sold for $70, and a lot of people dislike the idea of having to pay more for a Switch game than they paid for Tears of the Kingdom, and there were not Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. Thank you. But the thing is, I need to point. I'm a little bit of an economics nerd, so I need to point something out. I looked up the inflation between March of 2017 and May of 2023. So the $60 you paid for Breath of the Wild is now worth $72 in May of 2023 money. So you're actually getting it in terms of actual purchasing power. You're actually getting it for slightly less than you paid for Breath of the Wild.
So what you're saying is thanks, Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the money printing started under Trump, so I don't want to make this a partisan issue.
I'm just joking.
Thanks, presidents in general.
It's really thanks, Federal Reserve. But yeah, the hilarious and frustrating thing for me, I agree about the whole inflation situation. However, whenever I pre-order a game from somebody and they say that'll be $60 and I give them $60 and then I show up at that night to pick it up and they say that'll be $10, I'm a little frustrated.
No, and like that's okay. Obviously that's something that you can be upset about. I'm not going to defend that.
There were ways to get it cheaper. I think GameStop Online did the pre-order for $60. I believe that's how I got it. And then a lot of people who went the digital route were able to both buy discounted eShop cards, like $100 for $90 or something like that, and then buy vouchers, which got you 2 games. So they essentially got Tears of the Kingdom for $50. There were some loopholes if you looked hard enough, but it is
but
interesting.
I actually pre-ordered it like within the same week that it came up for pre-order in store because I was with my little brother-in-law and he wanted to play the game too, and we were driving through Norman and he was like, oh, we should stop in and pre-order. I was like, no, yeah, that actually would be like a cool experience for us to do together. Go in, pre-order the game physically, go in for the midnight release. It'll be fun. And so then, I was kind of bummed that cost me $10 to do it that way.
Totally. I mean, this is an interesting history point because it's the first time Nintendo's sold a game for $70 since the disc era started. Plenty of old cartridges. Probably Ocarina of Time was $70 on release, and
that's $70 like $1997.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it hurt the sales much at all, from what I can tell. In fact, all I had to do is tell one of my friends that, hey, the best game of all time is probably coming out next week. And he became a Switch gamer, bought a Switch, bought Tears of the Kingdom, bought a Zelda Pro Controller. That was another thing that Nintendo put out. That was a divisive looking Pro Controller because it's black on one side, white on the other handle. And some people did not like it at all, but I thought it looked pretty nice. The design language for Tears of the Kingdom was really interesting. They did all the circles and the kind of pixelated camouflage type look that they've been accenting things with. Very stylish, and it seemed like 60% of people liked it anecdotally, but lots of conversation in my Facebook groups about whether or not it was good.
All right, so with that out of the way, let's skydive into the game itself. And let's start with the game's opening, because I think the opening actually is really, really cool and very, it really pulls you in a lot better than I think the opening in Breath of the Wild did, because the opening in Breath of the Wild is just sort of like, wake up, you walk out, and then you're in an open field, which some people like, but I like something that kind of more sets the stage for the conflict.
Yeah, I'd have to say that the opening to this one was perhaps one of the strongest storytelling moments in all of Zelda. Zelda not especially known for its storytelling. I would say, that definitely good stories in Zelda, but the continual Link saves the princess, Ganon is the bad guy again sort of thing it's a pretty well known story telling experience. So this being like kind of I've been looking for something like this in a Zelda game for a while. In fact, I actually thought something very similar to the beginning of this game would happen at some point as a follow-up to Wind Waker. Back whenever I first beat Wind Waker, and you shove that sword into Ganondorf's head and he turns to stone, I imagined a story in a Zelda game in the future where whenever Link draws the sword from the stone to defeat, whatever wizard of the month it is that is kind of Ganondorf-like but isn't Ganondorf, he draws the sword out, and then the stone, pile of rubble that he's on when he pulls it out, falls away, and there's the Ganondorf statue, and he, breaks free, and then you're just like, whoops, you unleashed the ultimate evil. Well, that sucks.
Isn't that what happens in Ocarina of Time when you pull the sword?
More or less, yes, but he was already free, we've been I've kind of expected something like this for a while, but this was really well handled with the whole, the way the tone shift from as you keep going deeper and deeper with the music and the spooky gloom stuff, and of course whenever you reapproach it later on, and some of the rubble that was there before has been removed, and you can see more of the story of the game now, that if only those rocks hadn't been there, you'd know what was coming, So There's like a lot of cool, interesting things that happen there. They even keep continuity later in the game with Zelda's drop torch being down there whenever you go down there.
Yep.
Really, I
pictures.
don't remember that.
Yep.
And the pictures that she was snapping being in your camera roll.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
that I liked.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool, small details of storytelling.
Okay, just
there.
sorry. As an aside, sorry to interrupt, but did you guys like keep those photos in that were there in the camera roll?
Yeah,
Yes.
they weren't bugging me.
Yeah, I kept them there because it's like, well, these aren't my pictures. These are Zelda's. She's going to be upset if I hand it back to her.
I figured she was going to be dead or something, so I was like, if I delete these pictures, I'll be real bummed when I find out she died. You know?
Well, if she gives you back your hair tie, then she can have her pictures back. I think that would be a fair deal.
Yep.
Yeah, the opening was very effective for mood setting. I think that the music from the opening screen throughout the entire game was probably Nintendo's best effort on music. And I usually don't notice it or pay much attention, but just the creepy kind of vocal samples that felt like they were in a different language or going backwards or both was very cool. I've also seen it noted that Nintendo is kind of flexing even during just the intro of the game, how it's just plain text, not even a logo that says The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom in small white font. It's like they know they've got something special. They don't need to prove it with a big flashy logo. There's some cool continuity stuff where you start the game with max hearts from Breath of the Wild, but not max hearts
I never had
in
max
Tears of the
hearts in
Kingdom.
Breath of the Wild. You can't get max hearts in Breath of the Wild if you fill out your stamina wheel.
You can if you cheat just a little bit.
Ooh.
Yeah, canonically, Link never filled out his stamina wheel, so canonical Link is a horrible person.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't care about climbing mountains. He only cares about being stabbed. What a chump.
But anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
That might have been it. Just
okay.
lots of great attention to detail. I mean, seeing Ganon in the form that he was incredible, and I actually probably would have preferred him to stay as Zombie Ganon. I think he got less intimidating as he became rehydrated. So I really liked his design as a dead guy.
Yeah, I actually did not feel at all intimidated, even when he went Red Super Saiyan during the fight by him. But his spooky mummy form was legit creepy. It had a very Re-Dead sort of vibe, like N64 Re-Dead, which has always given me just the willies. Mm-hmm. So it was so funny whenever I was playing alongside my little brother-in-law who got at the same time as me, and we, he came across his first Gibdos, and he was like, "Man, these things are spooky." And I was like, if the screen didn't freeze and and a woman didn't scream in your ears, it's not creepy.
All right,
yeah.
So after the opening segment, we are then transported to the Great Sky Island, and a moment that is reminiscent of the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild. So, what do you all think of this Great Sky Island?
I think the Sky Island is superior to the Great Plateau in nearly every way, because as opposed to, now it still obviously has the limiting factor in that you have to stay on the island and there isn't a real good way of escaping it. But as opposed to the rigid, forced approach that you had to take on the Great Plateau, now of course you got to pick which direction you went, but generally speaking, it was very hard to do anything in a way that the developers didn't intend you to. On the Great Plateau. But with the Sky Islands, I constantly felt like I had found some weird way of doing something that no one could have possibly have thought of other than my sick, twisted mind. And so I really, really, truly enjoyed it in comparison, because I was honestly didn't feel like I was trapped in one little space because I was just having so much fun playing around with all the weird mechanics that the game offers and discovering things.
Scott?
It was a great tutorial island, and as I was playing through it, I was warming up to the game, and I don't really look at a lot of trailers or even treehouse content for Zelda games leading up to release because I just want to experience them for the first time. And so I was kind of forming my opinion of the game as a whole in those first few hours, but it wasn't until I got on the first glider that my mind began to be blown. I was like, okay, I'm in for an actual treat. This is going to be crazy.
Okay. I liked it a little bit less than the Great Plateau. One, it does feel a little bit, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it is a little bit more linear because you kind of feel like with the way the thing is sort of set up where it has like a large gaps in the center of its mass, that you're kind of encouraged to go around it in a very particular fashion. So it feels more linear in that way, which again isn't a bad thing. It can like force you to be more, you can scaffold ideas better doing that. And I actually, that's probably the one thing I did appreciate it. But, it's sort of like, okay, I've done this before. It doesn't quite have the same magic the second time around. And it's because of the linearity. It doesn't feel like I was doing quite as much like improvising. But maybe I'm just less creative than Nathaniel. And how I
For me, the improvisation that I could do in those areas, it was, instead of it being like, okay, you can go any of the 4 cardinal directions, and that's why this place is open world. It was, yeah, you're gonna have to go the direction you pretty much have to go. But have you tried gluing 20 planks together and then just carrying a giant bridge around and just climbing up it to get wherever you want to go?
Okay, yeah, and it does give you more flexibility doing stuff like that. And like, the funny thing is, I remember when you get to the frozen area, there's like this tall cliff and it's icy, so you can't climb it. And I think the way that the like intended ways to like go around the side and climb up the mountain, I still don't know what's on the other side of that mountain because I just cut down a bunch of trees and glued them together and climbed up them. And I was talking to a coworker of mine, and he's like, "Yeah, no, that's exactly what I did."
Yep.
Well, also, I think, Glenn, that you're able to see some things or notice some things as a developer that might be invisible to other players. Like we might be being funneled through an area in a certain sequence without noticing it, but in the back of your mind, you're probably thinking, somebody did this on purpose, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where, like, you're led through a tunnel where you're introduced to the concept of Zonai and stuff like that. So.
But there were still multiple points where I did feel like, because of the different layers that were going up and down and stuff, that I actually had more freedom than I might have thought by moving between the different areas and stuff. And there were entire areas in there that I completely missed and had to find later when I came back to, which was another interesting thing that I liked about it comparatively to the Great Plateau. There's essentially no reason to ever go back to the plateau ever again once you have finished the tutorial in Breath of the Wild. But in Tears of the Kingdom,
if you have the DLC, there is a reason, but, other than
right.
that.
Yeah.
I think I left a red Switch t-shirt up there and never got it, but oh well.
Yep. But yeah, that's the thing, is that with this one, I consistently went back. There were still a couple of things to discover there, and there were definitely places that I just liked to go to gather supplies like the bright bloom seeds, stuff like that. Yeah, I thought it was cool. I liked it.
Okay.
And it's on this island where you're introduced to your 4 Zonai powers. Let's talk about those.
Took the words right out of my mouth, so...
I ultra-handed them right out of your open mouth.
So, so let's start with the first one. I think this is the first one you get, Ultra Hand, which the name is a nice little reference to an old Nintendo, back when they made toys in the 70s. That little extendo grabber thing. It's kind of like the boxing gloves on a spring that you see in cartoons.
And there was a WiiWare game, I believe it was a Club Nintendo exclusive reward called Grill Off with Ultra Hand, where you could use it to grill some steaks. So yeah, I can't believe that they put that actual name in a Zelda game. It is wild.
But anyway, so Ultra Hand, the ability to pick up basically anything in the world and then glue it to anything else. And I have to say, this is like an immense amount of power to give to the players. So
yeah, from a gameplay standpoint, the number of times I was absolutely sure that I had broken a puzzle completely and done stuff in a way I was not intended to do, and it completely trivialized everything, was great. And, you know, some people from a development standpoint might have a complaint about that, but for me, I think anytime you can empower your players to feel like they are just outsmarting the game, it always makes them feel cool. And that constantly happens when you're using Ultra Hand. It's also just a great utility. Like literally just today, I was going through trying to just pick up the last few shrines that I don't have. I think I'm at 130 shrines out of 152. And one of them, you've got to like drop bananas on these little platforms, and you know, in Breath of the Wild, you would pull those bananas out, and Link would hold them in his hands, and then you walk over, and then you press B, and he'd let go of it, and it kind of give you like a little reticle showing you where it's going to drop, and that's the best you could do. And if the physics of the game didn't work out and the banana bounced around, you just have to try again. But it is so nice to just be like, and Ultra Hand bananas, plop. Okay, I did it. It worked. You know, it gives you so much fine-tuning that you can do so often, as long as you're not trying to glue a wheel to a car, because then it will glue to the completely wrong place every time.
Yeah, that actually does raise an issue I have with the Zonai devices. We'll talk more about those later, but yeah, a lot of the devices didn't have a set... Some of them had set glue points that it would snap to, and some of them didn't.
Yeah, this was a power that I was a little bit worried about going into the game, because in games I like to know what I'm supposed to do, know where I'm supposed to go, and I don't have as much fun with the creativity side. Come up with your own solution, get there somehow. I like to know that I'm accomplishing what the developer wants me to do.
Yeah, there is a fun in kind of unraveling the knot.
Yes. So I do miss aspects of linear Zelda for those reasons, and thankfully there's an awesome series of 20 games that I can go back to anytime that I want to. And thankfully in Tears of the Kingdom, Ultra Hand is a powerful building tool that is very flexible, but is rarely needed to be used in crazy ways that are hard to wrap your mind around. You can kind of just do the basics to get by. You can also find blueprints and auto build to kind of have things created for you. So I was glad that I did not have to really get deep into that system and go crazy with it. But for those people that I see on social media creating mechs and Godzillas, good for them. They have the ability to do so. So the developers did a good job making this a tool that can be used deeply or shallow and fun both ways.
And I think it ultimately is going to create longevity for the game in a way that, once a week, there's still a YouTube channel that releases builds of the week and stuff like that, and new ideas that people have come up with, and crazy ways that people have figured out how to use things. And it really is turning into a physics-based version of Minecraft, essentially,
Wow.
which is really cool to see, because that means that this game is going to continue to be played for a very long time as people continue to figure out how to build really interesting things in it.
That's awesome. Yeah, IGN just gave this Game of the Year, and one of their editors on their podcast, I believe it was Logan Plant, commented that, or maybe it was Kat Bailey, one of the two said that these Zonai powers are incredible feats of game development and could have had entire games based around each one of them. So it's quite a feat that Nintendo put all of them so successfully in one game with rarely a glitch or a flaw to be found. So props to them.
Well, so my opinion of the Zonai powers, I'm sort of torn on it. So on one hand, I think it works really well in this game, and I do appreciate it. I kind of agree with Scott a little bit on the, as I already mentioned, the liking to find like the one solution. And I'll give a reason for that. It's not that I like, well, first of all, sometimes creativity is better. It's better to have constraints to make you creative. Like,
Yeah.
But the other thing is, my experience with it is, one, I think the Zonai powers, and let me make it clear, I don't dislike them, but I did find that oftentimes they did kill the pace of the game, where it's like, everything has to stop, and I have to figure out how to engineer a solution. And so there'd be times where I'd be spending like 20 minutes on one problem, just trying to get everything lined up quite right and all of that. And secondly, one of the things I found is that if you give people a ton of freedom, so you see some of the creativity is astounding. And then if you look at the stuff I made, it's really, really basic. Because when you have that much freedom and that much power, my experience is that the way I typically use that is just to brute force problems. And it's not elegant. It's not particularly clever. It's just like, oh, yeah.
Well, what I really appreciated about that, though, was that, and this works for my particular brand of ADHD extremely well, I was able to hyperfixate on coming up with a very specific solution that I wanted to make work. And yeah, so that was one thing. So in Breath of the Wild, there's a puzzle where you're trying to bring this torch up to the very top of a tower thing and light a thing. And there's all these water hazards along the way that keep knocking the fire off of your torch thing. And I had found a metal bowl-like thing that I wanted to sit the torch thing on and lift it up from outside of the tower and get it up there. And I kid you not, I spent an hour and a half trying to get this to work. Because I didn't care about, like the pre-prescribed way to do it that was very obvious. It's obvious how I was supposed to do it. But that didn't matter to me because my brain was like, but can you do it this way? And so I spent a long time trying to make it happen and kept getting really close. And then there was some sort of artificial thing that kept getting in my way. But then with Tears of the Kingdom, it seems like those sort of artificial limitations have been removed. And so there have been multiple of them where I brought in something into a shrine that I wasn't supposed to have and used it in such a way to create apparatuses that I was not supposed to have in the shrine, and then came up with some weird contrived way of using ice sleds to make something work, and had some of the most fun that I had the entire time watching the physics go wild whenever I tried to fit literally 10 ice sleds inside of a cube made of ice sleds and started shooting ice sleds out of it.
Oh, man. That's awesome.
But, yeah, so it's a good ability. I am... Let me put it this way. It's not something that I would like to see as a mainstay of Zelda games moving forward. Just because, one, I think it'd be really hard to keep it fresh with how much power they give you. But two, there is, like, I enjoy being able to figure out how to use it, but it's also like, I don't know, it's one of those things where, and we'll talk about this more when we get to Zonai Devices, but it's one of those things where it's like, I think this is like a one-game idea. But, okay,
yeah, no,
we've talked a lot about Ultra Hand.
Before we move on, 2 words. Hover bike. Hover bike.
Yes.
I looked up a YouTube video of how to make the perfect hover bike, and it is complicated. It involves perfect alignment and doing backflips and perfect spacing, but you get one that doesn't veer off to one side or the other. All it is 2 fans and a steering stick, and you're playing a completely different game, especially in the depths. So that was one of my most enjoyable parts of all of Tears of the Kingdom.
Well, we will be talking about Zonai Devices, but this is still on the subject of Ultra Hand and on what I was talking about before. There is a superior hover bike that you can get by breaking a chunk off of an elevator in one of the construct development buildings in the depths. It is not a piece that exists anywhere else in the game, and it has lighter physics on it than anything else. So by adding it as a platform in your hoverbike as a 4th component, it actually makes your hoverbike more controllable and lighter.
Wow. And you can auto-build that piece.
You can auto-build that piece. And so it costs you 3 Zonai to slap that puppy into your bike and get the perfect hover bike. There's some super wild things that can happen in this game. I love it so much.
That's amazing.
Okay, so speaking of gluing things to other things, let's talk about fusion. The ability to attach items to your arrows, to your sword, or weapon, I should say, or to your shield. Thoughts?
Yeah, it was fine.
This was delightful. I loved it so much. First of all, gluing a spear to the end of a spear and having a spear was delightful. Mm-hmm. Second of all, if you're going to have breakable items in a game, the fact that I could just pick up any stick and glue the horn of a powerful enemy to it, and then it was a perfectly good weapon, was wonderful. I truly enjoyed gluing something like a Muddlebud or a Puff Shroom to the front of my shield, walking up and smacking them in the face with it and it going off. That was cool. Or having it and doing the shield ride to make it go off was very cool. Yep. There was constantly fun and cool things that I was discovering how to do with this sort of stuff. Also not having to worry about having a magic bar for your elemental arrows, but just being able to tie a pepper to the front of your arrow to have a fire arrow was super dope.
Didn't know you could do that with the peppers.
Yep, there's not the regular peppers, but the fire peppers.
Oh, the fire fruit.
Needed a better way to sort through your 200 item inventory, but other than that, great time.
1,000% true.
Trying to fuse anything to the arrows was horrible. Like it. I do not know why they thought that was acceptable.
That should be a Matthew Toronto comic where Link walks up to a Lionel, or rides up on his horse, jumps off the horse, goes into bullet time, pulls out an arrow, and then spends like 9 panels just throwing all the wrong items over his head. And then finally gets the right one. Yeah,
and it's one of those things where it's like, hey. You know what would be really cool? If I could just make a list of favorites. Like, I know they haven't automatically made one, but I want to be able to, because some of those, I want to be able to, I don't plan on shooting something with a gold Lionel horn.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So I'd like to be able to just say, hey, I want my list of all the ones that are just the ones I want to use. Not the ones I use most frequently, but, I just want to, I don't know. It's
yeah, no, I completely agree because there's a level of there are some things that I want to quickly be able to access that I don't use very often because I use them in very specific situations. The problem is that then they are lost somewhere in the middle of literally 500 slots. Mm-hmm. And so then I'm like cycling through the different types, trying to figure out which one is going to place it the closest to the front. It's not going to be the most used. Then that's going to put it near like somewhere in the back. It's not high damage, so it's not going to be in that one. It is probably in the like by type. It'll probably be somewhere near the front of the middle. So I guess I'm going to use that, and then I'm just going to slide through and
that is the sound exactly.
And the thing is, like the Zonai, I don't think I ever fused a Zonai device to any of my arrows, and yet that was like a very specifically, like if I needed to pull the Zonai devices out, I would have just grabbed them from the Zonai portion of the menu and just like, okay, I'm going to, it's weird.
Yeah, there's a couple of those things. The other one for me was clothing choices. There in the next one of these, I'm sure they're still going to have multiple armor pieces and sets. You have to have some user-defined outfits, especially whenever since you don't find all 3 pieces of an outfit in the same place. There are oftentimes outfits that I would go, okay, I'm going to wear the pants from this and the shirt from this and the hat from this because that works the best in the situation, considering the fact that I don't have a full set. And so having to actually go through the set and change them one at a time was very frustrating. I think having 4 or 5 user-defined outfits at the top of the list, you just click one button and he's wearing it and then you're good to go, would be awesome, especially for skydiving, because I always had to change out of my combat gear to my skydiving gear every time I launched from a thing, and It was always a pain.
Yeah, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but anyway, so fusion. Yeah, no, I agree with Nathaniel's assessment. The breakable weapons were way more tolerable when I could just make any weapon be moderate, like be at least of decent quality. at any time because, oh, well, I have 72 black Bokoblin horns, so, I can just turn the spear into like a middling trash mob killer.
Right, especially whenever you were... So in Breath of the Wild, if you went and fought a Lionel, right, you'd spend weapons fighting the Lionel, and you'd destroy all of your weapons fighting him. And out of killing the Lionel, you would get a weapon. And it was very frustrating that, yes, you might get a slightly better weapon from fighting the Lionel, but you might have even broken just as good of a weapon fighting the Lionel as you got from the Lionel. And so this new concept of enemies dropping items that turn into some of the best weapons in the game is actually super cool, because when you break a half-decent item fighting a Lionel, or even all of them, you still get the Lionel's sword, and then you pick up his hooves and his horn and stuff like that, and you get more better equipment from him.
I thought it was hilarious that weapon degradation was one of people's biggest complaints about Breath of the Wild. You go into this game thinking, what did they do to fix the problem? And then one of the first pieces of exposition is, man, there's a big problem in Hyrule, and all our weapons are even worse. They're all rusty now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think they did mostly fix it. There's a part of me that still wishes that there was, like, again, a middling quality sword or whatever that I could get partway through the game that just didn't break. Because there's still a part of me that is like, I wish I had that thing that gave me like a better sense of progression. But this definitely smooths it, like it like sands it down nice and smooth. Yeah, it just doesn't rub me the wrong way anymore.
I think that the one of the things that Nintendo will get better at as they make more of these types of games that other good open world games have figured out over the years is that as you move along through the game, oftentimes you're supposed to unlock things that make some of the like harder things that were difficult to do at the beginning of the game a little more trivial now. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of that in this because you get to where you're making things like the air cycle and stuff like that. But that's all self-imposed and stuff that you're figuring out for yourself. It will be nice as they figure out, like you say, halfway through the game, you get a weapon that doesn't degrade. It's not gonna be the Master Sword that kills the main boss, but at least you can just use it when you're fighting just trash enemies and not have to worry about it. Or, new traversal things that allow you to get around places a little bit quicker, other than just teleporting to a close-by location and jumping off of it,
Yeah, I think Fusion is probably my favorite. Just because it made the biggest difference in the moment by moment gameplay for me in terms of the breakable weapons.
For me, my favorite is probably what we're probably going to talk about next, which is swimming through the ceiling.
Yeah, that's very cool.
All right, so yeah, as Nathaniel said, we're going to be talking about Ascend now. So, Nathaniel, why do you like Ascend?
I love it for so many reasons. First of all, just the inception of the idea is the exact same thing that makes it so wonderful. You can dig your way down to the deepest pits of some dungeon, and then you go, well, wait, now I'm done. How do I get out of this place? And that is the original concept that they used to figure it out. They were messing around. They were in the bottom of a deep, dark cave dungeon sort of thing, and they were like, it really sucks that we just kind of have to backtrack our way back up through this thing. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just press a button and you would be on top of the mountain?
So have they actually gone on record and said that's why they made it? Okay, I suspected as much. That's what I suspected, but it's good to know. Yeah,
that's the thing, is that's how it started out. And first of all, that's just such a enjoyable concept from the perspective of, yes, none of us want to spend all this time fighting our way into a deep, dark place and then not being able to get out, other than just going back through the way that we came. Because as soon as you start going back the way you came, there's no interesting, wonder that's associated with the exploration anymore. Now it's just backtracking.
Well, and climbing out is probably going to be harder than dropping in.
Right. And so that is super helpful. But then also, in the exact same way that in Breath of the Wild, it was so wild that you could just look over and be like, oh, well, what's the fastest and best way I'm going to be able to climb up this mountain and then fly from it to the next mountain? Now you're saying to yourself, oh, well, what's the best spot I can get under and ascend up into and then be on top and then go somewhere? It's so much. It makes you view the entire world differently than you did in Breath of the Wild. So even though it's set in the same world, you see different ways of traversal now that you didn't see in the first game, obviously, because you didn't have that power. And I think that's really cool. And then, of course, it's way more utilitarian than one would have thought, being able to pop up on top of something, and it gives you a second to decide if you actually want to come out of it. Or literally this morning, I was fighting a stone talus, and he was just about to, like, fall on top of me, and I just quickly opened Descend and went through him and came out the top of him and then broke his rock on top of him. There's just cool things that it does, and it just is really enjoyable for traversal.
Scott, you have anything to add?
Nope, that covers it.
Okay, so Ascend is probably the one I'm most torn on. Because on one hand, everything you said, Nathaniel, is true. Like, I love it for that reason. It's super convenient. But at the same time, I think that it sort of wound up trivializing some parts of the game and also made other parts of the game, like, limited how they could design certain areas, because like the dungeons all have super high ceilings so that you can't use Ascend to get from one floor to the next. And I have to admit, I kind of resent the fact that was the case. I think it would have been nice if they just had established that, oh yeah, you can't ascend through that material specifically, and so that they could have, like, the dungeons could have had that more claustrophobic feel of older games. But yeah, no, I definitely found myself using it to try to climb mountains and stuff. And I appreciate the fact that they put areas like that in the game so that I could easily get to the top of something. So next up we have Recall.
If any of the powers in the game break the game entirely, it is Recall. The fact that any puzzle, I don't know if you guys realize this, but 90% of any puzzles in the game can be completely undone by simply ultra-handing a platform, holding it somewhere for about 10 seconds, bringing it back down, sitting it on the ground, walk over, stand on top of it, recall it, you float up wherever you were, and then just stepping off of it, just completely undoes about half of the shrines.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, I could not believe that they could be used in conjunction. I thought for sure Ultra Hand, like, you're holding it, Ultra Hand is active, you're not releasing it. I did not think that would count as a state that something could be recalled to.
Yeah.
But
it totally did.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the cooler abilities. One of the things I really like about it is there's no cooldown. Yeah, like the abilities in Breath of the Wild had cooldowns. These don't. You can fire them off as fast as you want. And for me, Recall, I also like the fact that time freezes when you use it. So for me, Recall was the, no, and like something falls off of the side of a sky island. And, it's just like, I can get the reticle over that one pixel and it just flies back up to me. And it's like,
yep.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. The quality of life on that was so good, as well as this one turned out to be quite helpful multiple times. The trail could also be sometimes used as a way of tracking something down that you accidentally lost. So if something had fallen off of a cliff and you couldn't find that one little pixel, you could actually jump down the cliff and then open it up and look up and watch the line go down the cliff and find where it had landed. And that was actually really cool.
I guess Recall does break the game, but it's, like, weirdly enough, it's breaking the game in a way that I actually find... Like, I don't sit back and go, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, no, it is continually enjoyable, and oftentimes what Recall mostly does is saves you from your own ineptitude. And so rarely did I feel like, oh man, this is just something in the game that completely breaks everything and makes everything so simplified. It was mostly like, oh, no, okay, I fixed it, it's okay. Like, that's normally how Recall is used about 80% of the time. And then, of course, there were some really weird, interesting things you could do where if you glued one item to another and recalled something that was spinning, it would start spinning. And then I even managed to throw something like an item from one style into another, and then pick something up and glue it to the other one, and then recall the original item, and it drug the item back for me.
Yeah.
Like, just some weird, nifty things that could be done with it that are just not something you would really think about in other games or other types of games.
I think they could have gone further with this one, like an entire dungeon based around recall, or even bring it into some story significance. Maybe you kill Ganondorf by recalling something that, a sword that was there 1,000 years ago or something. I feel like it was a little bit underutilized.
They do it does kind of play into the story in the very, very end of the game. But we'll get to that in a second.
All right, we'll put a pin in that.
Yeah. So, auto build. The last ability, and one that you actually have to unlock, which I appreciate the fact that they've had, even if it's something that you probably unlocked pretty early in the game, I appreciate the fact that they have an unlockable ability in this one, so that you can kind of gain that, slowly build your character up instead of just being given everything at the start, and then there are really no surprises after that in terms of abilities.
Yeah, they put some weird stuff in the ability circle too, like accessing your map in case you don't want to press minus.
Yeah.
And that was weird, but auto build was awesome, and I feel like it's kind of un-Nintendo. They did the things in the menu that we wish they would have done elsewhere in the menu, such as saving your own favorites and being able to...
So the technology was there.
Right, yeah. The only thing that would have been better is if you could share your builds with a friend, send them your own schematic that you make. That would be nice.
That would be super cool, honestly. Yeah, I felt like
save it to Amiibo.
Yes, that is one way of doing it. That would be a very Nintendo way of doing it too. Instead of just having it direct message it to them, you'd have to actually buy a physical toy and then save it to that and then hand that to them. But yeah, the auto build, like Scott had mentioned early in the podcast, it actually allowed you, if you didn't like to use or were not as good at using Ultra Hand, to still get access to a bunch of those things that other people were figuring out how to do. So that it was really cool. Like, you find a handful of good schematics, and now you're just slapping together something that is pre-made by the devs to work in a specific way. And that was exciting. That was fun. And then, of course, you still had the option of building your own things. And then there was some stuff, I don't know about you guys, but I found a grove full of apples. So many apples. And so I ran around and I picked all 100 apples that were in the grove. And then I threw them all on the ground in a pile. And then I glued them all together. And then I saved that as a favorites in my auto build. And then every blood moon, I would come back to the grove and I would auto build my apples, and it would jerk the apples off of the trees and build them into a pile of apples.
Oh my gosh, that is
You just
brilliant.
walk around just hovering the apples around, and it would go and just pull them off of the trees, and then you'd have your pile. You just pick them up and put them in your pockets. It was so cool.
You mad genius.
It's moments like these that make me stop and go, wait, am I dumb? Why am I not doing stuff like this? I'm the way I play the game is really boring by comparison.
That's why I love the Ultra Hand thing so much. There's so much nonsense you can do with it that doesn't work in any other video game, which makes it a purely unique experience that you can't feel anywhere else. Because even Minecraft has the ability to glue some blocks together, right? But they don't have physics. There's almost no physics involved except for explosions. Explosions are the only physics they have, really. And so it becomes this thing where people are trying to figure out how they can leverage these explosions into some semblance of real world physics. But because Ultra Hand functions with real world physics, it has so many wild implications that just don't work in any other game. It's just awesome.
Yeah. I actually did use now that I think of it, I did glue things together to grab them and pull them to me. And that's something I found, is that if you need to move a lot of stuff, you just glue it together and then you have one central thing and shake it loose. But yeah, in terms of Ultra build, again, I know I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but this is one I'm a little bit torn on. I think on one hand, it's really, really great that you can do stuff like what Nathaniel said, and I have no issue with that kind of thing. But the other thing is it allows you to spawn in stuff using Zonite. Is it Zonite or Zonaite or Zonaiite? Because there's only one I.
Zonite.
That's what I think it is.
Okay.
Zonite.
We
Anyway,
settled it.
So you can generate stuff with Zonite, and there's a part of me that feels like that's kind of breaks the game a little bit.
And this is a recurring theme that you're bringing up, Glenn, is that the game is getting broken. But I think that the developers really want you to feel like you're conquering this landscape. You are a beast, and you're not the helpless Link that got dropped into the wilderness in Breath of the Wild anymore.
Yeah, I suppose. It's not even that I'm opposed to having that. I think the issue I have is that they give it to me right off the bat instead of making me earn it.
Well, I actually don't think the Zonai being used in auto build is, and the reason is because your batteries, right? So you have your batteries to build your stuff, and the main way of getting more batteries is trading Zonite. And so you have to discover places to get Zonite, and you have to discover places to refine or trade Zonite for refined Zonite energy or crystals, and then you have to go and turn that into battery, right? And so you already have such a specific thing that you want your Zonite for the earlier you are in the game, because you find out very quickly that you actually can't run a vehicle for very long on one battery. And so then you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I get more of these batteries? And you figure out there's this essentially this side quest of kill things in the depths, get Zonite, track down places where you can get that turned into the energy for batteries and make new batteries. Oh, by the way, you can only buy so much from each individual dude, so you're actually trying to find as many locations that sell it as you can, and then you're like traveling to these different locations and stuff. All of that is just to get more batteries. And if you use your Zonite constantly to make vehicles from scratch, then you don't have it for the batteries. Whereas, whenever you get to the end of the game, and your batteries are all maxed out, which I'm like 2 bars from my batteries being maxed out. Yes, now I feel like I can use my stockpile of 500 Zonite to make something whenever I feel like it. I don't care at all, because I'm going to finish my batteries sometime soon. But now I can build that sky bike with no components like that and just start flying it around. Or I can just be like, and here's a tank. Have fun dealing with that, Talus. Like, there's just so many things you can do with it at that point. But before that, I felt like I was always, like, low on Zonite, and I was trying to keep every bit I could for my batteries. And so I feel like
you raise a fair point. That is basically how I played the game, too. So I suppose it is balanced. I don't know. When I heard that, oh, yeah, you can just generate this, I remember going, what? Really? Huh. It's just kind of a weird thing to give the player control over so early on.
So Nathan, you brought up a lot of the upgrade systems, which I have been wanting to talk about this for months. This is a huge part of my experience with the game, so I'm going to try to blast through this just because it's on topic right now. So there's a lot of things you can upgrade in this game. You can get armor pieces. You can upgrade them with fairies, which you have to unlock. You can get multiple stars on each piece. You can upgrade your battery. And like you mentioned, that whole Zonite and crystallized charges and all that stuff. I can't even remember all the names of the items because that portion of the game felt very mobile gamey to me, where you're like gathering one currency to spend it on another currency to spend it on the thing that you actually want. That's a strategy in mobile gaming so that the kids playing it lose track of how much money they've actually spent. I don't know why something like that was implemented in a one-time purchase big AAA Nintendo game. It felt too obscure. Like, can't this just be rupees? Can't we simplify this? And it all was very time consuming. I feel like there's a sort of reality distortion field going on in Tears of the Kingdom where it makes you feel like you're having more fun doing the things you're doing than you're actually having. Or at least it's been my experience where I think I'm having fun while I'm playing it, but then I put the game down for a couple of weeks and I think back to like, what was I doing trying to get my battery so big and all the hoops that I jumped through? I mean, it is not easy or fast to upgrade that battery. You get 100 of the crystallized whatevers, and then you see that you get one little sliver of an extra battery out of like 16, and then you find out that they can be blue instead of green. So I actually resorted to duplication glitches, which Nintendo kept patching out and you had to find new ones. But I would go and I would duplicate the things that I need. And in this case, it was large zoonite. It was crazy. I found this place called Tobio's Hollow where you could go and you would have to get a multi-arrow bow from a Lionel, preferably a 5-arrow one. You'd strap large zoonite on an arrow, shoot it at a certain spot. It would split into 5. It would freeze rather than disappearing where it would in most places of the game, but you could go up there and you could collect you shot 1 and it turned into 5. So I would burn through arrows like that. That's one system. Then I would need to buy more arrows. So I'd go to a store. It would run out of arrows. I'd have to use another system by going to sleep, saving the game, loading the game, and then the store would be restocked. I'd buy more arrows. I'd go down there. I'd do it some more. Then my bow would get weak. I'd have to go use another system in the game where you feed your bow to a rock Octorok and it spits it out restored, which is cool. It's another way to get around weapon degradation. So now I've got my bow back, but I would have like 5 of them at a time. I'd have all the rock Octoroks marked on the map. There's a little path I would go through, but you can only do it once per time that a rock Octorok in its life. So you have to kill it. Then you have to wait for the blood moon, then you have to go back and do it all again. So even when I'm using glitches to duplicate my stuff, it's still a redundant, tiresome process that takes hours and hours just to upgrade my thing. So that was kind of baffling to me. Like, man, what am I doing with my life? And is this fun?
No, it's not fun. I agree. Like I remember when I first saw the kiln or the furnace or whatever you want to call it. I think technically it's a kiln, isn't it? But they call it a furnace.
They call it a refinery.
Refinery. Whatever. The refinery. And I was like, okay, you give me the zonite, and then I give you the crystals, and then you turn the crystals into batteries. And I'm looking at this and it's like, no, this is dumb. What? I mean, I still, whenever I had enough, I would go in. But it was one of those things where, to me, battery progress was very incidental. So, I didn't actually use Zonai Devices hardly at all at the beginning of the game because my initial progress was very slow. I didn't spend much time in the depths, and I didn't upgrade my battery very much. And maybe this is one of the reasons why I'm not terribly jazzed about, like, the Ultra Hand and all that. It's just because it was less useful for my playthrough because of the way I played. But I looked at that and it's like, no, this is who thought this was a good idea? This is just blatantly wasting my time.
Yeah. So what's so interesting to me is how big the game is and how the different approaches to things can affect things so differently and create a different experience for everybody. First of all, that in and of itself is kind of cool and unique. But so for me, I had this. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here for a second because I'm going to explain to you guys how this game became one of my very favorite games that I've ever played in my entire life and how I spent more chunks of time playing it. See, right around the time Tears of the Kingdom came out, I had come across a product called the X-Real glasses. These are essentially computer monitors that you wear. They're wearable monitors.
Are you using it right now? Are we in your eyes?
No.
Okay.
No. I discovered that if I set I built a shelf into my wall right above my bed. If I set my Switch into a basket on this shelf and plugged a Switch dock into it, and then ran out of that into these glasses and then used Bluetooth earbuds and a Bluetooth controller, I could lay in my bed while my wife slept right next to her, and in complete darkness, I could play Tears of the Kingdom for hours into the wee hours of the morning.
You were in the Matrix.
I was in the Matrix playing Tears of the Kingdom for 7-hour sessions. The most hilarious thing about this podcast is that whenever Glen contacted me about 2 months ago and was like, all right, getting close to finishing up Tears of the Kingdom, when are you going to be ready? I had completed the depths and completed the map and had done 115 shrines and had done 4 out of the 5 temples and had done all of this crazy nonsense within the first 3 weeks of buying the game. And then when I finished the depths, my ADHD kicked in and it said that was my main goal that I was trying to accomplish, was finding everything in the entire depths. And I just stopped playing the game, dropped the controller, and wandered off. Baldur's Gate 3 came out around then, and so I started messing around with it. And so then it was whenever Glenn was talking to me about it more recently, I was like, I still need to go back and actually finish the final, get the last sage, finish the game. And so I did that in the last week. Now, that's the wild thing, is that very, very few games or media in general can hold my attention that way. And there was something truly magical about laying in my bed and discovering the depths in the pitch blackness of my room, laying on my back for hours every single night. And I never felt like gathering Zoanite was a thing that I was like trying to accomplish. I felt like exploring the depths was what I was doing, and I was finding new places and doing new things, and I was every time I found one of those maps that says, there's a piece of treasure here in the depths, it said, oh, you already found it, because I had always meticulously searched the depths already in that area and found the stuff and found some cool weird tunnely like waterway or something and found a cool piece of armor there or whatever. And so all of the Zoanite thing, like turning it into the charges, it didn't feel as much to me like my goal was to mine Zoanite and then turn that into a currency and then buy it. All I was doing was walking up to a dude and saying, here's some Zoanite that I found laying around one time, and then I have my currency. So for me, it was much more like selling something for some rupees and then going and buying stuff with my rupees.
That's cool.
Which is funny that you brought that up. And so for me, like I said, I've only recently discovered this about my weird brain, but there are arbitrary goals that I have set in my own mind based on my ADHD that I will obsess about a game until I have completed that goal. And the second that goal is complete, I lose all interest, like 100% of interest, no more. And I didn't know that the goal this time was to discover the entire depths. And so I managed to nearly 100% the game, other than Korok Seeds, because no one does that, because unless they're a masochist. I had nearly 100%ed the game by the time I finished with the depths. And so all of these things just fell into place for me, and I had a blast the entire time.
Wow. How many hours were you in there? In the Matrix?
I'll actually have to check. Well over 100 hours, I think.
Oh, I think you're well over that, because I played 130.
Yeah, I think I might be at 200. So
since we're sharing, I got the Nintendo year-end summary thing, and they told me that I'd spent 207 hours in the game.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah, I will have to check, and that was what was so wild, is that it all happened within the first few weeks. It was the first time in my life that I understood how a person could become like that obsessed with like WoW or something like that. Like I always thought that was ridiculous that somebody would spend so much of their time in a game world. And this was the first game that ever grabbed me in that way. So this will always be probably in my top 2 or 3 video games because of that experience, which I understand is completely anecdotal and completely unique, that I happened to get an amazing device that allowed me to play it in a very specific way, laying in my own bed. At the time. Oh, I also had the M Classic, which upscales the game by a fair amount, and so plugged into this whole ridiculous rig on my shelf, and so it even was higher fidelity.
Can you imagine Aonuma wrapping the game? He puts his stamp on it. It's done. I did my best. I think it's pretty good. I hope you enjoy it. And then he sees you on your back in your bed with the game strapped to your face, 8 hours a night, losing all your sleep. He's like, what have I done? What have I unleashed?
Yeah.
And I should point out that I had a fair amount of insomnia a couple years back, and always had, and I had gotten it completely under control when this game came out, and then it completely wrecked my sleep schedule for 2 months.
Well, that's a pretty awesome story, and I think that you definitely bring up a good point that if someone played through this game organically, was not trying to max out their battery instantly like I was, or just letting the systems kind of feed into each other, because they do. Like the sky gives you the sun to lands, which drives you down to the depths, which makes you find things, and you find maps elsewhere that it's all interconnected. If people just play through that organically, I think a lot of the unlocks will take care of themselves. But
like I said, for me, it was a lot more organic. That doesn't change the fact that I look at it and I think it's padding. Like, it is padding. It's just it's not padding that I just said, okay, I'm going, whenever I have enough to get a battery, then I'll get a battery.
Yep.
But it still is padding.
Thankfully, I enrolled in Tears of the Kingdom Addicts Anonymous before I upgraded every piece of armor. I unlocked every piece of armor, and there was a little piece of my brain saying they all need to have 4 stars. Every piece needs to have 4 stars, which is ridiculous. Most of the armor sets
Here's the thing is the armor
for
sets, from what I've experienced, are harder to upgrade in this game than they were in Breath of the Wild. And as soon as I realized that, it's like, I don't care anymore. Yep. Like, I put way less emphasis on upgrading art, like, because in Breath of the Wild you go to the Great Fairy and it's like, oh, I can upgrade this. Okay, sure, why not? I'm already here. In Tears of the Kingdom, it's like, oh, I need a bunch of that stuff. Nah, I'm not planning on using that armor hardly ever anyway. So I just focused on the ones that I knew I was going to be using frequently. And even then, I felt a little cheated for time, where it's like, hey, you need Gleeok's guts for this, and it's like, oh, well, I have to go find the King Gleeoks, and those things take forever to get to. So it's like, now I'm having to use my warp points just so that I can farm Gleeok's guts.
Or just get one and then duplicate it.
Well, I mean, I didn't do the duplication glitches, so. Zonai Devices.
I can be really, really quick with my piece.
Okay.
I think that they might have focused on quantity over quality. I didn't find most of them very useful, but then again, I'm not the creative builder type. I stuck to a few essentials. And I was just kind of surprised when the page kept growing and growing and growing. What is there, like 52 of them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is not anything that I have been a part of, because even as maybe the one that has enjoyed the like weird, wacky creativeness of this game the most, I was unable to figure these things out. But on one of these channels that I frequent, who talk about these like builds of the week and stuff, they have continually found ways of like creating suspension out of cooking pots that works better than the suspension in any other vehicles that they have made, or using other random zoonite pieces in vehicles in ways that no one would have foreseen, that just worked really, really well. And so I think what they ended up doing with the quantity over quality thing was they just added in as many Lego pieces as they could of different shapes and sizes, knowing that weird fans would obsess about it and come up with very unique ways of using them to make stuff happen. Yeah. And so I think that there was probably less work put into them than could have been, but at the same time, I think that was actually their goal, was that they're going to create this system based on all of these rules, and then let you figure out the best ways to use them, even if they themselves don't know the best ways to use them, which works very well if that is your weird engineering type of brain. Mm-hmm. And then for a lot of us who did not figure all these things out, we're just like, boy, this is a lot of random pieces of junk that I don't seem to be able to do much with.
Yeah,
that's kind of my experience with it. I don't know, it's one of those things, like I said, I didn't focus on building my battery up, and I didn't spend much time in the depths early on. The way I went through the game was actually kind of regimented, because I think one of the issues that I had with Breath of the Wild is it felt very unfocused to me when I was playing through it. So I was actually like consciously planning out how I was going to approach the game. And I think the game was a lot more fun for me because of that. But back on topic, the Zonai devices, I didn't get much use out of them in the beginning. And then by the time I got to the end, I just kind of stuck to what I knew worked. And, that's, I guess maybe my issue with these sorts of games, it seems like maybe it's just a case of sour grapes, and maybe I'm being immature about it. And that, it kind of says there are so many possibilities. You can be super creative, and, you can be. We've seen people do that. But the thing is, the vast majority of people like me, I'm more concerned about getting stuff done. And so it's like all that creativity is kind of actually gets in the way of getting things done, because you then spend like 40 minutes trying to line up the fans with your steering stick so that your hover bike doesn't veer off. And by the end of it, I was using a hover bike that veered off very slightly to the left, and it's just like, you know what? I don't care anymore. I can counter steer for it. It's fine.
I agree with you, Glenn. I'm right there with you, but I do think that we are the problem. I think we need to loosen up and lighten up and smell the roses. But I won't. Side note on the Zonai devices as well is I just don't like them tonally, especially the gacha dispensers. So I am a little picky with my Zelda presentation. My preference is like Twilight Princess. I think that kind of Lord of the Ringsy, more serious and dark style is my preference. And a big old gumball machine would be so out of place in that game. It kind of fits in this one, sort of.
So being fired, like reaching a city in the sky by being fired out of a cannon with chicken legs. It's got chicken legs! Props to anyone who got that reference. Is totally fine, but a gumball machine is a bridge too far.
There are some goofy parts of this game, and that's what they're going for. But I'm just saying my preference.
Yep, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, for me, the quintessential Zelda experience is Majora's Mask, and I think that would have felt perfectly at home in Clock Down.
Yeah, I still need to play that game.
Little corner over there with a gacha capsule machine spitting out stuff. But I do admit that one of the greatest faults of this game is how contrived the entire situation of, oops, you know how just a few months ago how we found out that there were like all of these like secret things underground, and we use them to try to fight the great evil and stuff. Well, turns out underneath that there was even more stuff underground.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you pay attention to some context clues, it's Tears of the Kingdom. We'll talk about this probably in the story. Tears of the Kingdom does not take place months after Breath of the Wild. It's probably been like 5 years.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still like the general concept of, oops, underneath all of this ancient civilization that we just recently discovered, which I know technically there's 100 years, but still, underneath all of this ancient technology that we've recently discovered underground, there was even more ancient technology.
Well, why would we keep digging? We already found the super weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah, we already
it's so hilarious.
That kept us busy as it was.
I just get this feeling that I don't know if you guys ever watched any of those shows like Strange Days at Blake Holsley High or So Weird or any of those. There was a lot of these shows that the idea was it was like the sort of the kids version of The Outer Limits or X-Files. So instead of having the characters like traveling around and being FBI agents and stuff and discovering these things, instead it was they were in a town where weird things happened every week, and just like, oh, I don't know, for some reason this week, like, it was magnetic forces made, like, everybody in town grow 3 feet, and now everybody's tall. Well, how are we gonna deal with that weird situation? And I get the feeling that that's what goes on in this particular world of Zelda, is it's just like, ah, man, a giant tower launched out of the ground and destroyed my house again. That's the 3rd time this week.
Actually, it would be kind of funny if in Breath of the Wild, like, one of the shrines was, like, in the ruins of someone's house.
Yes.
And the quest to get into the shrine had something to do with appeasing the person who used to live there.
So for me, the capsule machine existence was not near as off-putting as the fact that we have yet again had random pillars and shrines appear as though there were not just that happening like a few months ago. And also, for some reason, no one's mentioning that it happened just a little while ago. Like, there's some vague, slight references to it, but no one's like, boy, isn't this weird, it's happening again. They're just like, oh man, so strange, this thing just popped up. And it's like, were you not here a minute ago when it happened before?
Nope, they're like all developers in disguise. They're like, you bought this game and you're playing this particular title, so we're interested in this particular phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Zonai Devices, I think I mentioned this before. I think it's a really cool idea for this game. It's one of those things where it's like, I kind of don't want this to become the focal point of Zelda. You know?
No, and I don't think it will or should.
I think they've already stated that it's not going to.
Yeah, because the thing is that games have tried this in the past before to abject failure. Like Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts.
Yeah.
Right? So this has been something that people have tried before, and it has never worked, ever. So the fact that TOTK managed to like nail this once is amazing. And yes, please now flee away from it in the opposite direction as fast as you can, because if you think you are going to like tweak it a little bit and it's going to make it like that much better, I actually am afraid it'll just break it in a way that all of the other companies that have ever tried to make a game where building vehicles was a large part of the game all already failed.
Well, for me, it's not even that. It's just like, Zelda is one of those things that it never sticks with the gimmick too long, and that's one of the things I like about it. And so I'm like, since this is like Breath of the Wild 2, and it's very clearly Breath of the Wild 2, there's a part of me that's just sort of like, is the Zelda series going to morph into this thing that looks like, it doesn't look anything like what it did before, it doesn't feel anything like what it did before? Like, are we seeing a gradual shift where the franchise is going to be unrecognizable? And like the focus is like, oh, you know, like 20 years from now, people are like, oh yeah, that vehicle building franchise. And it's like,
yeah. And I highly, highly doubt that, because what I get from this game is that it was a lot of truly interesting, unique ideas that they decided to put into the same world at the same time. And I get that, especially comparing it to Breath of the Wild, that they all will have now felt like they already did that and there's no reason to play around with that anymore, and they want to find a new unique idea. Because like you say, every single Zelda game, for better or worse, comes up with a brand new system of something. You know, there's traveling between 2 different worlds and traveling between 2 different times and being in Groundhog Day, and there's jumping into the 2D world randomly, and there's sailing the 7 seas, and there's turning into a wolf and then turning into not a wolf, and there's all of these different concepts that all completely make a really unique game, honestly, comparatively to all the other ones in the series, which is why we keep coming back to them over and over again, is because yes, the concept of going to 3 dungeons so that we can then be sent off to 7 more dungeons so that we can get the items required to then go fight Ganondorf has been done literally 15 times now. But it's the world we're in and how we do that keeps changing, and so we're perfectly fine with it. Like, we enjoy that amount of familiarity while enjoying the changes that happen in it. And so we can all have a different favorite Zelda game, but still all love Zelda a ton. And so I do think that it is unlikely that they'll just randomly be like, and now everything is airplanes from now on. Oh yeah, I forgot the one where the gimmick was being in the sky and flying airplane birds.
We've talked about the Zonai devices. Let's talk about the actual world itself. We're exploring the world on like 3 different layers now. There's the sky, there's the surface, which is reused from, largely reused. There's some differences from Breath of the Wild, and then there's the depths below it. So let's start at the top where the game starts. Well, I guess technically the game starts in the depths, but ignoring that brief segment where the actual
game proper.
Proper, yes. Starts. Let's start with the sky.
Not the playable intro.
Yeah. What was your what do you all think of exploring the sky?
I think that it was very enjoyable. The huge vantage points, being able to see things. You'd notice some similarities between different groups of sky islands, and you'd be like, oh, that's one of those things over there. I want to get over there and mess with that. However, that said, they were all small enough areas and reused the same assets enough that they felt fairly samey after a little while, and I was actually not overly interested in adventuring in them near as much as the rest of the world.
Yeah, that was basically... Oh, sorry, Scott, were you going to say something?
I was going to agree as well, so maybe he summed us all up.
Yeah, no, the sky, they put so much focus on it in the leading up to the game's release that it's really weird when you actually get to play the game, because it's like there's not a whole lot in the sky. It's there's a lot of islands that are identical to each other, and outside of the Great Plateau and some of the dungeons that you find in the sky, they're like it's all kind of the same. It's very sparse. There's kind of the same issue that Skyward Sword actually had, is that there's not a lot up there.
Yeah, I was relieved and disappointed at the same time because of how heavily they were promoting the sky. I thought it was going to try to be like Skyward Sword 2, which is not one of my favorites. But then also disappointed when it was so sparse. Could be a good opportunity, like if they actually did want to add DLC to this game, just dropping in 2 or 3 big islands up there would be a serviceable way to do that. But yeah, I definitely had a lot more fun on the other 2 areas.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting because I remember the very first teaser trailer coming out for it showing Zelda and Link clearly in a cave. And people saying, oh, Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out, and it's obvious that there's going to be some sort of, like, underground area that we're going to be in during the game, and that's what they're going to do to differentiate it. And then there was nothing for a long time, and then we had an E3, and they finally announced, or a Nintendo Direct, I can't remember which, but anyway, they finally showed the Sky Islands and Barbarian Link jumping off of Sky Islands and flying around in the air and stuff, and it was like, whoa, wait. And then everything from that moment on was Sky Islands, and it legitimately, many of us thought, oh, so it's more like Skyward Sword? What was up with the cave? Oh, well, whatever, and moved on. I was legitimately surprised whenever I went into the depths and realized that there was an entire game map down there.
Yeah. So moving down from there, there's the sky, and then there's the surface of Hyrule, and it's the same Hyrule that we explored in Breath of the Wild. So how do you guys feel about exploring the same map and being in that same space?
Well, I don't think that the developers can really be faulted. I mean, if you get the DLC in Breath of the Wild and you turn on Hero's Path mode and see where you actually went, if you're anything like me, you probably visited 10% of the surface. So I wouldn't be surprised if they actually had that data and kind of hotspots of where people visited, like shifted things for Tears of the Kingdom where you're actually going on different paths for the most part. I never really played this game and felt, man, I'm seeing the same thing again. I also have a bad memory, so that could contribute to it as well. But But no, I feel like they did a good job updating it with the caves and the wells, new characters, new dungeon locations, and all that. So I did not feel like I was retreading.
Yeah, I certainly didn't feel like I was really retreading things or struggling with any of that. I think that there was enough differences where they had clearly changed the topography by using, the new chunks from Sky Islands and stuff like that, or things like that, to really make me feel like it was quite a bit different, as well as one of the things that I was really hoping for that we did get a tiny bit of, but not as much as I wanted, was NPCs. I was really hoping that the biggest difference between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom would be much more robust NPCs and AI, which they definitely were more. And there definitely were more of them moving about from locations and stuff like that didn't just all happen to be Yiga. But it still was not as much as I wanted it to be. But that to say, I was always just interested in, like, I was going along and I'd be in a place and I'd be like, yeah, I think I've seen this area before. And then I'd see a random NPC, like, walking along the road, and I'd, like, jump down there and I'd talk to them. And then I realized they were, like, traveling between two destinations, and I'd, like, follow them for a while and, like, talk to them along the way and try to get more information out of them. Yeah, they only had a handful of things to say, but then I'd be like, what are they going to do when they get there? And then they get 80% there, and then they say, oops, darn it, I forgot my coat or whatever, and turn around and start going back. And stuff, little things like that were enough to, like, change my perspective on things. And yeah, I think so much of Breath of the Wild we spent climbing up things to get as high up as we could and then jumping and gliding somewhere else that we actually skipped over gigantic portions of just trails and roads and things like that often. And so I think it was fairly easy for them to just rejigger things a little bit and force you a little bit more down into some of these paths and things that we completely ignored before.
Right.
And made it feel very fresh and unique.
Okay, well, it sounds like y'all had a very different experience than I did. Because, so I'll say this. I think that they did change things enough that it was fun to go back and look around. It's kind of like if you ever grew up in a town and then moved away and came back like 5-10 years later and go, oh, okay, a lot here has changed. It kind of is that feeling from Breath of the Wild. But the thing I noticed, and part of this is because of, like, the Zonai devices and all the different ways to get around, is that I noticed that I was engaging with the world way less than I was with Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, you spend a ton of time just wandering around Hyrule and checking every nook and cranny and wanting to see the landscape. And when I was playing Tears of the Kingdom, it's like, okay, I already know more or less what's over there. So if my little radar thing is not beeping and telling me that there's a shrine there, I'm just gonna go to my next objective. And that's the thing I noticed, is that if I look at my hero's path in Breath of the Wild versus my hero's path in Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, I'm, like, all over the place. Tears of the Kingdom, you can see that there are chunks of the map that I've never bothered looking at.
Yeah, it is true that one of the greatest things about Breath of the Wild that did not repeat in Tears of the Kingdom was the idea that while you were climbing up these things and getting to the top of it and then flying as far as you could to another place, something that would inevitably always happen is you'd look at it and you'd see a weird shaped rock, mm-hmm. and you'd go, oh, I should go check that out, and you'd drop a pin on it and then fly towards it. And yeah, that did happen a lot less in Tears of the Kingdom, I felt. It's true, because I generally knew what I was after in Tears of the Kingdom in the overworld, which was either shrines or caves. And so the most I did was look around vaguely for a cave and then just keep going, So
yeah,
there is some of that.
I felt like I was less inclined to engage with the world. And, like, a lot of the design in Tears of the Kingdom, like the ability to ascend and use Zonai devices to fly over stuff, kind of encourages you to just sort of gloss over the overworld. It's sort of like, yeah, we know you already did that, so we're just gonna expedite this. The other thing I will say about it is that it feels a lot less intentional because in Breath of the Wild, it's like you can look at a place on the map and go, there's something there. Like you could just tell by the way the hills and everything and the trees and all that were lined. And then here you can tell everything was retrofitted.
Mm-hmm.
It was like so it's you didn't have all the cool stuff with the cool landmarks. Now it's like we're having to figure out how to slot quests into this map that already exists that we can only make so many changes to.
Well, you've said enough of these things, Glenn, that I'm going to be pretty curious what you would score this game. I'm sure we'll get to that at the end, but I don't know. There's some spicy takes in here. What did you think of the depths?
We haven't even talked about caves and wells, and I just want to say the caves. My gosh, that does change exploration so much. Like it's I knew that I wanted caves in Breath of the Wild. I did not realize just how much of the classic Zelda flavor relies on being able to just walk into a cave and pick fights with subterranean monsters. So, I know I've sounded very negative this whole time, but caves, quite frankly, were just I absolutely loved them. I thought that was such an improvement to just the feel of the game and making it feel so much more like a Zelda game.
Yeah, it's nice that they add the entrances to the map as well. You can get little check marks when you...
Yeah, if you get the bubble frog.
Mm-hmm. Very good for compulsive completionists.
Yeah, so... Sorry, I just wanted to say something about that. Caves are amazing, and honestly, it's surprising that they weren't there from the beginning. But, okay, so the depths. And now we have the depths. It's this vast subterranean cave structure under Hyrule. Nathaniel, I know you really enjoyed exploring the depths. Do you have any more to say on that?
Yeah, the way the depths just continually shocked me by having new things to discover. I would continually think that it was kind of starting to be kind of bland and like, okay, yeah, I get it. It's kind of spooky, but a lot of it is the same. And then you'd walk around a corner and now there's a Colosseum here and you're getting mauled by Lionels inside of it. It was always something weird happening. And then, you're finding the areas with, the Poe things, the Poe salesman things and stuff like that. All kinds of weird stuff. Obviously, there's tons of mini bosses down there that were always really unique and interesting, like the frogs and stuff like that, which were fun. The fact that the stall horses allowed you to traverse through over the gloom was cool. Trying to work around the gloom was really interesting. There was, even though it had the really high ceiling and everything, it still seemed like there was a very three-dimensional feeling to it, because there was still like the big mushroom tree things that you would inevitably try to climb up to get around to other areas and stuff. I
love how so many of the plants look like they're like deep sea creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that was a big thing for me and I don't know if anybody else will have experienced this the same way that I did, but one of the other games that I really did connect with on a deep level in the last decade was Subnautica, the first one. And when you're going down into the deepest depths of the ocean and there's these giant terrifying monsters and you're in these, your robot mech suit that keeps you safe in high pressure underwater areas and stuff, there is this real sense of dread that you have that is hard to capture in other games and other situations. And as I was sitting there playing Tears of the Kingdom, I got a very similar feel in the depths as you get from the deepest, scariest sections of Subnautica. And it really connected with me on that level of just like, this is like a whole different world. Like a full game could be just that you are trapped in the depths trying to get out, and it would be a very reasonable game. Now, of course, you would want a little bit more actually in there instead of just mostly just traversal. But I really, really did enjoy the depths and trying to find the different areas and stuff. And then one of the truly interesting things to me was the cool ways in which you would personally discover things that no one really mentions to you in the game, of like, oh, wait, eventually you're starting to be like, how many of these root systems are there that I have to use? And you're going through and you're making them, they're like, why are they so arbitrary in their size and their shape? This is so weird. Why is it lighting up such small chunks of the map sometimes, and other times huge chunks? And then as you're going through and it keeps happening, you start looking at your map, and suddenly it dawns on you when you've gotten a handful and you look at the two maps next to each other. They're shrines. They're connected to the shrines. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and then you realize, wait, all the valleys or mountains on the overworld, and then all of the valleys in the overworld are mountains in the depths.
Right, and the rivers are impassable walls, and the places where the the big Po salesman things are connected to the places where the great fairies are, and
that one actually took me a really long time to realize.
Yeah, there's so many weird things that you discover so organically down there, and there's not just like a little tooltip that's like, oh, by the way, in case you're wondering how it works, the shrines and the root systems are connected, and these impassable walls are here because rivers. That's not happening. Like, there's some teeny little hints every now and then if you listen to every single NPC and read every single Yiga thing, where they're like trying to figure out why it works the way it works and not actually telling you. And those sort of organic ways of you figuring out how the depths work and then being able to use that later in the game. Like, when you finally finish the depths and then you're just able to be like, oh, now I know where all the shrines are. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Something you didn't mention, but that I wanted to interject that I really liked about the depths is also the fact that when you take damage in the depths from most enemies, not all enemies, but most enemies, you also take gloom damage, which I thought was a really cool way of just sort of emphasizing that this is I don't know, I like it when certain parts of a game operate off of different rules than other parts, because it makes that part stand out. It's one of the reasons I don't disparage set pieces in games. Big set pieces, because it's like, well, that makes it stand out more.
And it gives you unique enemy types, too, which I really enjoyed. Like, the idea of having a gloom version of most enemies that were honestly more threatening. A armored gloom Lionel is the most terrifying thing ever, because it's already hard enough to fight a Lionel, and then now every time he hits you, you lose hearts permanently.
So the first Lionel I fought in the game was an armored gloom Lionel. I was just going around, and I saw a little, I was walking up a ridge, and I saw a little question mark appear on screen, the kind that when an enemy hears you or something, you see that, and it's like, oh, okay, there's a bokoblin on the other side of the hill. So I'm like, start throwing the bright blooms down to... No, actually, I think what I said was, I'm just going to ignore it. It's not a big deal. It's just a bokoblin. I turn my back, and then it's like, why do I hear boss music? And this thing starts coming from, like, screen left. And then I find out, oh, it's wearing stone armor. I can't... Oh. This is not what I wanted to be doing today. Yeah, no, I like the depths. I definitely do. I think it adds something. I think my main issue with the depths is that there's not enough variation. You basically have volcanic depths under Death Mountain and parts of Hebra because of the hot springs. So again, it makes sense. It's logical. I do appreciate that. It's like, oh, there are hot springs here, so there has to be volcanic activity. But other than that, it's just all the same flavor. And it's kind of like the Sky Islands. And it's like, I really wish the different parts of the map had were more than just topological differences.
A little bit continuing the theme of quantity over quality. Perhaps.
Yeah, it's definitely a quantity over quality kind of situation.
Yeah, I definitely did. I would have loved to have seen different biomes essentially down there, where, oh, this area is still the depths, but weirdly, randomly, there's like a lot of vegetation over here, and it's very nice, and like got like glowing blue flowers, and it's very pretty, or whatever, and like, oh, this area is even worse than the rest of it, and is all full of zombos, something, things like that, and using different colors and stuff. It wouldn't have even had to have been like that crazy of differences to just make some different themed areas with different colors and make you feel like it was you were actually making some headway. There were some times where I was just going and going and going and going and being like, boy, I feel like I've been going a while, and obviously things look pretty similar. And so that was a little discouraging sometimes whenever you're looking at the map and trying to figure out how many of these little things you're going to have to find in order to clear it all out. And everywhere you look, it all looks the same, especially whenever you start climbing a wall, and then this is before, of course, you realize the whole river situation, but you're climbing a wall trying to find a place to get up on and jump off of, and it's like, this is going on for no, it's one of the walls that goes all the way up. Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my marks for good level design, one of my metrics is, can I look at a screenshot from this game and remember what part of the game that's from? And you can't do that with the depths.
Yeah, very, very few places would you be able to guess. Obviously, there's kind of like the mine areas, which are a little bit slightly noticeable. Then there's obviously the different sort of like Colosseum things or places where you find the Poe tradesmen. And then there's that one, and this was truly the most interesting thing almost in the entire game for me. When I found the graveyard with Gibdos underneath the Gerudo stuff in the depths. And there's clearly some sort of, some sort of lore there and secrets and things.
Quite frankly, I have no idea what you're talking about. Could you go into more detail?
Yeah, so you find this one place in the southwestern corner of the depths, and there is a small area that it's the only place you can find Gibdo after you've finished or one of the only places you can find Gibdo after you have finished the Gerudo temple. And it's a graveyard, and there's like a couple of like stone tablet things that you can read information on that seem to be hinting at some sort of puzzle and some lore that's around there that I was having trouble figuring out. And it's just an interesting little area because it's pretty flat and nondescript all around it, and then there's just a graveyard filled with zombies just right there.
And I think the depths would have benefited from more places like that.
Yeah, because it was spooky and weird and truly interesting, and I was like, what's happening here? And I spent a long time just like trying to figure out if there was something special around there. I believe the lore actually ended up referencing a place south of there that was closer to like the actual borders of the game. And so it didn't have as much to do with it. And I had a weird situation where I accidentally did something with my weapon, and my weapon glowed at a weird moment, and I thought maybe it was like trying to alert me to something. And so I was like trying to get that situation to recreate. But anyway, I accidentally created a very lore heavy, very interesting moment there in that graveyard that was truly interesting and spooky. And I think they could have like truly made a lot more interesting locations like that. Like there was one place in the depths where it was just a forest of trees, and the majority of the forest was alive and evil trees, and that was cool too. I was like, oh, what's this? And of course that was before I realized that was in direct correlation with something in the upper world. But it still was a really interesting thing, and so I would love to have seen and will love to see in the future with other things that they make, if they do something similar to the depths in the future, ways of really differentiating areas from another and making you feel like it's not just one big area that happens to have a couple of landmarks, but a whole world, right?
All right, so speaking of underground complexes, this game reintroduces more traditional dungeons. I don't want to call them traditional dungeons. So one of the things I noticed is it just me, or is there a much greater lead up to these? Like like Breath of the Wild followed the typical Zelda formula where you had to do a certain number of tasks to even gain entry into the dungeon. But it seems like Tears of the Kingdom, like sometimes you're having to like fight bosses and stuff just to get into the dungeon.
There was certainly a lot to the fact that they really connected, I think it was done very well, really connected you story-wise to these dungeons in more than just hey, isn't that the big robot that killed everyone last time? We should find a guy in town who knows about the big robot, and that's pretty much it. To you're interacting with the characters and there's something going on in town and there's problems and stuff and you're then you end up in a boss fight alongside the other hero character for a little while and maybe somebody gets hurt or something and there's an important reason why you need to continue on and stuff. A great example and one of my favorite moments in the entire game was protecting the Gerudo village during the onslaught at night. From the Gibdo. That was so cool. I loved it so much. And those sort of town defense sort of missions are always my favorite. And for some reason, Zelda always does a really good job of them, even though they barely do them. Like the aliens in the ranch at in Majora's Mask is another great example.
What?
And
spoilers?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I spoiled a 20-year-old game's alien cow plot.
Wow, okay.
23-year-old, actually. But, yeah, I liked getting to fight the magma creature on the volcano, and even just, while it wasn't as in-depth as the others, just getting to climb the ships to get into the eye of the tornado or whatever.
That was my favorite. Yes.
Yeah, that's
cool.
Just because it's this just keeps going and going and going.
I accidentally found that thing long before I actually started that quest line, so that was weird for me. And
so
then
you didn't have the sage?
Correct.
Whoa.
Yeah, and that is one of the things I've heard people complain about is that you need the sage to complete the dungeons, but you can sometimes find them before you have the sage.
So I got to the point where I was supposed to be finding the place and I needed to find some sort of clue to lead me to the next thing. And I was like, dude, I have a shrine up there. I can teleport up there right now. Let's just go. And the game wouldn't let me. And I had to finish the little investigative quest line beforehand. It was kind of a bummer, but it was fun.
Interesting. I mean, these dungeons are such a huge improvement over Breath of the Wild. I don't miss those giant animals one bit. The Wind Temple, I think, is by far the best, so much so that it feels a little bit imbalanced. Mm-hmm. But that's just me being nitpicky again.
The number one worst one, but also the best one for the exact opposite reason is the fire one.
Right.
That one was a huge, mungus pain. My little brother-in-law actually hates it with a deep-seated passion because of Yunobo specifically, and hates Yunobo. I beat that dungeon.
Yeah, a lot of people feel that way.
Yes, I beat that dungeon for every single person who played the game in this household. They all eventually asked me to play through it for them because they couldn't stand. We're talking, I have played through that dungeon at least 4 times now. And it's kind of infuriating, but at the same time, it plays to the exact strengths of Tears of the Kingdom, which is that I ended up, by the end of it, just completely breaking the dungeon and doing everything exactly the way I wanted to, just by, climbing up things I wasn't really supposed to climb up and flying through the ceilings of things I wasn't really supposed to fly through the ceilings of, or riding my air bike around doing things, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's too trial and error-y through the intended method.
Well, my issue with that one is just aesthetically really boring because it's these broken apart kind of open air rooms and stuff, and the ceiling's super high because they don't want you to use Ascend, and it's one of those things where that was the first one I did, and I think it is easily the weakest because it's not interesting to look at. I don't remember there being any particularly interesting gimmick.
But hey, at least the boss is easy and forgettable.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was the most fun that I had with any of the bosses was the 3rd or 4th time that I played through that dungeon, and I just drove my air bike around in the sky and shot Yunobo at him from the air and killed him without hardly ever touching the ground. That was awesome.
I think you've earned saint status for beating that dungeon 4 times for your family members. Saint Nate.
Yeah, so structurally though, they aren't entirely dissimilar from the from the Divine Beasts, because it's still go to the usually 5, though I think the Zora one was actually only 4 switches, and it's like trip however many switches or whatever to access the boss.
Yeah. There, you do get a small key, a handful of small keys in this game, but they didn't really.
Yeah,
use
but
them for
those
the
are
dungeons too much.
mostly in like shrines, right?
I know, that was kind of weird.
There's like 3 small keys in the entire game, and I really missed the key style of dungeon.
Not if you use the duplication glitch. I'm just kidding. Those didn't work on small keys.
You can't tie a key to the end of an arrow and shoot it at somebody?
Yeah, it'd be kind of cool if you could, and like unlock a door from the other side of the room.
Yep.
Yes.
That's for the next one. Tears of the Kingdom 2.
Tears of the Kingdom.
But yeah, so I think it was like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you took a step in the right direction, Nintendo, but come on, we want actual dungeons. I don't know. It was better. It was significantly better, but it wasn't quite what I wanted.
Aonuma's latest interview says that we Zelda fans just think that the grass is always greener. So that could be.
I think that part of the issue, and that what's going to be difficult to figure out moving forward is that both the joy of these newer games and the reason why they are not like other ones are the same thing. Or the issue, especially with dungeons, is that they give you 3 or 4 very powerful abilities, and then you use them in conjunction with each other to finish puzzles. And of course, that's completely antithetical to the old system of, here's a new item, and now it's the key to all the puzzles in this particular dungeon. Now you'll probably never use that item again, more or less. Move on to next dungeon. And so, I'm
just going to say, I didn't use the sage abilities outside of the dungeon, so like outside of Tulin to try to get extra distance when gliding and using Yonobo to mine. I
use mine all the time. I don't know what you're talking.
Heck, I just turned them off. After a while, it's like, I don't like having these guys follow me around. Even if it makes combat easier, I'm just going to ignore them.
You mean you and the boys didn't roll up and like curb stomp guys and coup de grace them while they're on the ground? It was so much fun.
Yeah, and they were upgradable, which means this sucker poured hours into upgrading them all.
But yeah, I think that that does lend itself to an issue that I'm sure they'll come up with a solution to, because I know that they are a little more devoted to this new system, and I like it a lot. But they're gonna have to add items in for dungeons if they want dungeons to feel unique and the way they did in older games, because just having it be, hey, find out unique ways to use the powers you already have to get through here is not going to work for the old system. Yeah. And the new system is not what people are looking for as far as dungeons are concerned.
And I like getting it. And, they did give you new abilities. And now, admittedly, you got the new ability before the dungeon, but they do give you new abilities for completing the dungeon, because then you can use that ability any time. And I do like that in concept. It's just an absolute shame that using the sages is an absolute pain in the neck, because you have to walk up to them. It's like, okay, Yonobo, there's a wall over it. Yonobo.
That was dumb. We have 4 face buttons for a reason. So
just map them to the wheel.
Yeah.
Hold a trigger button, and then it's like shift, and then all of your face buttons now use one of the sage abilities. Yep. That's all they would need to do, is something like that, or the wheel, whatever. Yeah, there's some things that you can see them making some like rookie mistakes, because they haven't made that many of these kind of weird open world sort of games. But you'd think that Nintendo, with their pedigree, wouldn't make those sorts of mistakes anyway. And I had the same problem with Legends Arceus, where until I mapped the traversal Pokemon to the extra paddles on the back of my Pro Controller, I hated traversal. Once I did that, I was like, oh, I can just press a button and just easily flip between them. But whenever I was having to constantly wrench my hand into claw mode to get the the other Pokemon to come out that I needed to traverse, it was a problem. So they just need to figure out how to do open world traversal and activating your abilities with fewer controls.
Yes.
Because the way they're doing it has not worked very well in the last couple.
So one last thing I want to say before we move on from dungeons. My favorite was actually the sand, the Gerudo one. Mostly because it has a long, winding corridor at the start where you have to solve some puzzles and stuff. So it feels much more like an actual Zelda dungeon. And then what the puzzle is you moving in parts of the environment around to move mirrors around. Instead of just trying to figure out how to get to the switch, you actually have to like manipulate the environment. And so again, it felt like an actual Zelda dungeon. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if you're going to do it this way, like this is the one you should be basing them off of.
And the lightning power did seem to be the one that was most like an actual, like usable tool, comparatively to the other ones in combat or in, it reminded me more of having a lightning arrow or, some sort of special, what's the one in Twilight Princess, which is a ball and chain or whatever, something like that, where it's like, okay, I do the thing, now I have like some reduced movement, and I have this big powerful attack that's kind of like I can wind up and do, and it also has like some utility to it, stuff like that. Felt good.
Oh, I've got the perfect segue here, guys. You ready? Buckle up. Okay. One thing I did not enjoy about the dungeons in this game is at the end, you watch the same cutscene every time.
Right.
With the same music and voice acting.
Why did you have to discover the same thing after every dungeon?
Yeah.
Can it not be a slightly different piece of information? Maybe have it in pieces where you're not getting the full story every time. Even that would have been good.
And each one of them says a secret stone, which is a dumb name to begin with, but So the presentation in this game is very similar to very similar to Breath of the Wild, of course. I do think that the music was a step up. Graphic style, not my favorite. I don't like how you can't see people's noses.
I'm hoping they don't do like something as explicitly anime this time.
Right. Yeah. And voice acting, I think the two leads, Ganondorf and Zelda, did a good job. The rest are perhaps
I was really surprised when I heard that Ganondorf was like was voiced by Matt Mercer. It's like, wait, I actually recognize that name.
Yeah, the D&D
it's like,
guy, right?
Nintendo's not using some unknown for Ganondorf.
I was just surprised it wasn't Chris Pratt, but the real thing though, the real best voice actor in all of it was of course Link. We all know it. His performance of Link was the most true to his character of all. I mean,
he hums different songs now when he cooks.
Do we even know who it is?
Probably. I know we know the guy who did it for Ocarina of Time. He was actually a very very popular actor in anime at the time.
Huh.
So,
okay.
But
interesting.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about presentation. One more gameplay thing I just want to say real quick for the quests section. One, I liked how a lot of the towns had a major quest, like the mayoral election for Hateno. I thought that was really cool. I also noticed that a lot of the shrines, they had more overworld quests, so that you got like a just a blessing shrine at the end. But
I love that so much.
Yeah, it's so much better working. Like, it's weird because the shrines were like a really big deal in Breath of the Wild, and people were like, "Oh, this is a great idea," because you get more of the dungeon stuff. And it's like, no, I like questing in the overworld more. It feels more like traditional Zelda, where you have to like do some crazy sequence of events to get a heart piece, or piece of heart.
Yeah.
I have to remember that because I ran into a lot of issues looking up documentation for the Zelda RPG and looking up the rules for that because I kept looking for heart pieces instead of pieces of heart.
It is pretty incredible that this game is running on the Nintendo Switch. It really puts a lot of other games, even ports, to shame. Mm-hmm. I mean, Nintendo is singular in their ability to get something this big and this impressive to run on such outdated technology and make it feel fresh and new and without a hitch. So my hat
Yeah, I
is
mean,
off to them.
Skyrim has released 47 times in the last 10 years on every single conceivable console and toaster.
Yeah,
And
I mean, they
it
have to catch up
runs
to
like,
Doom.
Yeah, they do. And it runs like absolute trash on all of them, including the Switch. And yet here is a game that is just completely massive and, in my opinion, far better looking and has way more going on under the hood. You know, like just programmers left and right talking about how it is a marvel that everything just works and isn't horribly broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think
the frame rate is actually better than Breath of the Wild's was, except when you climb a tree. For whatever reason, the frame rate dips whenever you climb a tree, and I don't
gotta render
why
every
that is.
leaf, man. Every single leaf has to be rendered.
Well, that's the thing is they're not rendering as much, like they're transparent, and transparency actually is a lot more difficult than you would think in 3D graphics. As someone who has done graphical programming, transparency is not a free operation.
I think the reason that Nintendo of America and Nintendo Japan are so secretive and don't allow people into their buildings is because these games are actually huge. They're like king-size bed cartridges that they have like some sorcerers shrinking down into the tiny Switch cartridges that we use. So there's
or it's
no other
actually
explanation.
all of this is actually cloud gaming, but they have the only true wireless internet that is completely like has zero flaws, and that's why all of the cloud gaming that they do for, you know, why can't Kingdom Hearts fit on a Switch cartridge and you have to use the cloud version? Well, it's because all of Nintendo's games are cloud and they're just way better because they're Nintendo servers, but the PlayStation ones, they suck. So, you know, it's
I don't know. My
cloud
experience with Splatoon doesn't confirm that their servers are that great.
Well, that's because their servers are so busy just beaming the information to your Switch for every game all the time.
It's probably one of our two explanations, but most likely a combination of the two.
Well, instead of making up stories about how Nintendo works their magic, let's talk about the story that they told. That was not a great segue. I tried.
It's okay. It's okay. It was a very good story on a number of levels. It had twists and turns.
Wait. I'm sorry, I forgot. Spoiler warning.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
It has very good story, especially comparatively to Breath of the Wild. It had twists and turns. Could I see almost every twist and turn coming from about 10,000 miles away? Yes. From across Hyrule, I could see most of the twists and turns coming. Including the fact that I knew that Zelda would probably get turned back into Zelda at the end somehow, even though she was a dragon. Would it have been better writing if she had remained a dragon? Yes. Was I happy and less depressed that she turned back into Zelda? Yes. But there was a lot of really legitimately good writing done, especially comparatively to other Zelda games in the past, and they have to get major props for that. Of course, not all the voice acting was amazing, and so that kind of hindered the storytelling sometimes, but their atmospheric storytelling, as we stated at the very beginning, just stupendous. Oftentimes the way they could convey messages to you just through how spooky the room you were in was very well done. So I appreciate all of it.
Yeah. I would say broadly speaking, one of the things that I really appreciate is that the original is the structure of the story. So Breath of the Wild starts and the king says, "Go kill that thing." And, oh, by the way, you might want to prepare for it before you go kill that thing. And so you can just, you know what happened 100 years ago. He tells you, yeah, that thing destroyed Hyrule 100 years ago. You need to go kill it. So there's really no, like, the mystery is just like a foregone conclusion. It's like, how did Link end up in the chamber? And what was Zelda like before all of this? And it's like, well, I don't care. That's not going to help me kill that thing. And in this game, it starts out, it if you're going to do open air Zelda where you can rush to the end, and the thing is, you actually can rush to the end of the game. It's just you do not know where Ganon is, and it's not a surprise when you find out. You're like it wasn't even a moment of, oh yeah, duh, of course he would be there. It's like, wait, was that a secret? I kind of just assumed that's where he was.
Right.
I could have just gone there this whole time? Really? But, the thing is, they don't tell you where he is. They don't tell you they don't really tell you what's going on. So you kind of have to go through the story. And then if you want to rush to the end of, that's what you do on your second playthrough. So it's this interesting thing where they tell you a lot less, and the story is mostly you trying to gain the knowledge necessary to beat the game instead of you just like powering up Link.
Yeah.
So my overall thoughts on the story is that I enjoyed it. It was good. They put a lot of effort into it. The thing with the tiers where you unlock the memories, I really wish that they would have done one simple change that I think would have really improved it, and that is give them to you sequentially.
Yeah.
They gave them to you randomly, which does two disservices. One, you could be confused by getting things out of order, and then maybe unlock them all, waste time by going back and watching them in order. Or two, you could be ruined on a big surprise like Zelda's Draconification before you even know exactly what it is, or you've seen the things leading up to it.
Wait, I thought the Draconification, that one, you had to get all the others, and then they added one to the map.
Well, I mean, like when she's going to do it because
hints.
she asked.
Yeah,
yes.
no, it's telegraphed big time.
Yeah.
It's telegraphed like a punch out boxer. But
So just put them in order. I don't see why not.
I'm not disagreeing with your conclusion.
I think putting them in order would be the solution. I do think that there were a couple of interesting things that happen sometimes from you getting little pieces of the story and somebody else getting little pieces of the story, and you're talking about it in a way that creates some of that schoolyard, sort of storytelling sort of situation that we really haven't experienced in a really long time in gaming. But since we also don't like things to be spoiled, you don't really want that to happen that much. Like, you don't really want to talk to people about the game as much. And then I think it was the one good storytelling thing that they really, like, truly good storytelling that they did at lampshading things and making me a little confused about what was happening was, obviously we were introduced to fake Zelda. And then I got the one about her turning into a dragon fairly early on. And I didn't catch exactly that it meant she would turn into a dragon. I think they should have... That's the only thing I would have changed. Leave it in line sequential, but have it said that if you eat the secret stone, you lose your personality. You become immortal, but you lose your personality. And then, when we're seeing this version of Zelda bouncing around, we would be like, oh, she did it. Oh, she did it. Oh my gosh, she did it.
Yeah. That would have been like a nice fake out.
Right. Then you discover later on that she did do it, but it turned her into the dragon that you see way up in the sky, and that this one's a fake one.
Despite all the criticism we give it, I actually do like the reveal that she turns into a dragon, because, you're wandering around the Sky Islands and you see this thing flying around in circles, and you look at it and you go, what is that?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? What? Like, that wasn't in the previous game. Does anyone know what that dragon's doing? And no one talks about it, and you're just sort of like it. Yep. It's one of those things where, like, the dragons in the previous game, I think, had more said about them, or than this one does. So you're just kind of like, huh.
She would have been around in the previous game, though. So it'd be cool if there was a glimpse of her in Breath of the Wild, unexplained, that pays off in this game. But it's clear that they had the idea for it.
Yeah, but those islands were also theoretically there the whole time too, and you couldn't see them. So
yeah, this game did feel like more of a Legend of Zelda than I think it ever has. I was disappointed at one point early in the story, though, where there's a sequence where Zelda and Link are like passing the Master Sword to each other through time. Mm-hmm. And for a moment, I thought that it was going to be switching characters. like a system where
Yes.
you send the Master Sword to Zelda and play as Zelda, then you send it back to Link and play as Link. I thought that was happening, and I hope that it does maybe in a future game.
Yeah, and maybe that's one of the good ways of
Spirit Tracks. Glen,
zip it.
I think, yeah, something like that could be a really cool way of doing it, although it has to be well executed, because Resident Evil 0 did the same basic idea with switching between two characters, and when it's done poorly, it is really frustrating. But I do see that as being a cool way they could totally handle a future way of doing it. And yeah, I had hoped that there would be a little bit more interaction. That is one question about the story. Again, my little brother-in-law Mark was asking, he's like, so what happened the first time? And I was like, there isn't a first time. It's a set timeline with like a loop in it that backs up on itself. But then when you do bring up the fact that Breath of the Wild doesn't have any of these things in it, is it really a set timeline?
Oh.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're just making it up as they go.
Speaking of timelines, so Rauru is a goat man now?
Instead of a spirit that just an old man who gives you life powers?
Who looks suspiciously like an owl?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's some weird things where this is something that is never going to make sense. They should have never tried to create an official timeline, but the fact that both the Rito and the Zora exist in the same universe, and now they've added in the Zonai, and there's too many things that are clearly conflicting in the story. Why is Ganondorf instead of Ganon? And why is this appear to be his first time coming out and being like, I'm going to take over the world as Ganondorf back then, when he actually did that for the first time in Ocarina of Time, and Skyward Sword tells us that he is the reincarnation of another dude, but that's not this version, that's a different version, so it can't fit in any sort of timeline. It's literally impossible. Just stop pretending there's a timeline.
Yeah,
let's move on.
My question is, and I think the official statement is no, it's not a retcon. It's just that the history is just repeating itself sort of situation. But do you guys see this as a retcon? This is one of those things that, honestly, while I did like the story, there was a part of me that when I heard that the sage was named Rauru, and that they were talking about the founding of Hyrule, which I thought Skyward Sword handled. And I saw, it's like, oh, do I even care about this story? Because it seems like everything I liked before is being tossed out very haphazardly. When Breath of the Wild was very guarded and very careful, and it's like, oh yeah, it could be, it's so many thousands of years in the future that it doesn't really all of that stuff is ancient history, even more ancient than any of the history, any of the civilizations in our own history, like Sumer and all of that.
We care more than Nintendo, and I'm glad that we do. It's fun to care. We're on a podcast that's been going for almost 3 hours, and we're talking about the retcons, and that's cool. But you know what Aonuma is doing right now? He just wiped his mouth with a napkin made of $500 bills. So
yeah, and that's the thing about it, is that we can get all caught up in it, but I think we just need to not pretend that there is an overall storyline and just enjoy each one as they come out, because it makes way more sense, because there shouldn't be two dudes named Ganondorf who were the kings of the Gerudos who tried to overthrow.
Now, actually.
Who's the third one?
Four Swords Adventure had another Ganondorf.
Oh, that one, I don't even know if that one is actually canon. Anyway. I don't know if that's a real game. You had to have 4 Game Boys to play that one. Anyway.
But it's commonly accepted that was a separate Ganondorf than the one in Ocarina.
Every other time a dude named Ganondorf has shown up, though, he references, essentially I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to kill this stupid hero, and I'm gonna take the kingdom. And this is the first time, other than apparently Four Swords Adventure, which I didn't play because I didn't have 4 friends who had Game Boys, because I had no friends and I was poor, and so I wasn't able to experience that. But it just kind of, every other time it's been a the same Ganondorf, so it's really weird that it's a
Yeah.
different one this time, but who has the exact same origin story as the other one.
I was also poor and had no friends, but I just bought a collection from someone who passed away. I bought it from their family, and it has a GameCube with a Game Boy player, and it came with 4 Game Boy Link cables and a Game Boy, and it came with 4 Swords Adventures. So,
Are you at Scott's house?
what I'm saying is, you guys should come over.
Okay,
But
all right,
but
we're doing it.
speaking of Ganondorf, let's talk about the ending of this game, which my piece is simple. The spectacle was spectacular. It was amazing.
The music for that final battle, where you're up in the sky with the dragons, is probably the best track in the game.
Yeah.
Like, what was that? A saxophone? It was definitely a reed instrument that was doing the lead. I'm tempted to say it was a clarinet, but I don't know enough about music to tell. If it was a clarinet, that was an inspired choice. But I'm sorry.
I'll have to listen to it again. I wasn't paying attention to what instrument it was.
It's also weirdly mellow for a final boss theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. For me, I think the whole ending was really cool. I really appreciated that I just got to have a straight one-on-one sword fight with Ganon, and by one-on-one, I mean eventually it was 5-on-1, and then it was 5-on-5, or 6-on-5, or 6-on-6. Anyway, whatever. That's not important. The important part is that whenever you swung at him and he would bullet time out of the way of your attack was pretty dope.
Yeah,
really
you
appreciated
have that moment, and there's just like this moment of indignation where it's like, oh, no, you didn't.
Yeah, you're just like, wait, no, that's not... Well, I've been doing that to people the whole game, so I guess it is fair. But anyway, that's not fair.
How dare you, sir?
Hoisted by my own petard. But the general concept of the fight was very enjoyable, and I was pretty overpowered by that point, so it was not super difficult. Although, I must say, every time you got hit with one of his little missile things and a heart disappeared, that was pretty cool. Yeah. There was a lot of very vaguely meta moments in the fight that I truly appreciated, between the fact that he could bullet time, the fact that he could remove hearts, and then that life bar trailing off to the end of the screen. I loved that so much. That was actually good.
Yes.
It is kind of weird because it almost feels like a joke that you would see.
It was just very nearly a joke. It's
this weird balance of it's simultaneously intimidating, but also feels like they're playing a joke on you.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Nathan, you're reminding me of a few parts and kind of talking my opinion up a little bit. I was going to do the thing that I've been doing this whole podcast where it's like, it's amazing and I really liked it, but they could have improved it by... I feel like it could have been a little harder, and they could have done a little bit more to balance it, because a player is going to get to Ganondorf so many different levels depending on what systems they invested in the game. They might have max hearts, they might have their armor 4 stars, or they might be in their underwear. I think that they could have done things where, like, Ganondorf hits you and some meals leave your inventory, or the Master Sword stops working for a little bit, knocks out of your hand. You have to use other weapons. I didn't have to use a single other weapon, which was a bummer because I've been holding on to like 3 of my best ones.
Girahim do that, where he would knock the sword out of your hand?
I
if
can't
you
remember.
were careless, like he did that thing where he caught it between 2 of his fingers, and if you didn't pry it out of his grip fast enough, he'd like flick it off to the other side of the room, and you had to go grab it.
Yes,
there's precedent for it. They have the technology.
So just to kind of level a playing field for the people who came like super over prepared like I did versus people with not much in their inventory, they could have done things like my favorite game of all time, Returnal, does, where you get hit and you get a malfunction, and one of your abilities goes away or something like that. So I would have liked more of a fight with the final boss to match its visual and audio spectacle.
Yeah, and I think too, one thing that they could have really done there, and this is an issue that a lot of games that have a lot of choices on like skill trees and stuff struggle with, and so I get that it's a difficult thing to do, but like you say, different people are going to play the game different ways, and they're going to have different things that they have upgraded to different levels. I think it would be cool if there were ways that you could integrate Zonai devices and stuff into the final fight. Not that you would have to, but I don't think there is any possible way that you could really, build yourself a tank there in the final fight and use it against him. And even if you did, I didn't try, but I imagine he'd just, like a line will make it disappear or something. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of disappointing in a way, because I didn't even end up trying that because I knew it would happen. And so I do think it would be cool if there were different ways that you could try to handle fighting him. My very, very last thing to say is I think fighting him in his dragon form was just a wee bit anticlimactic. It was a beautiful moment. It was pretty nifty in many ways. I did appreciate stabbing my master sword into his forehead and exploding him. That was cool. However, the fact that he couldn't hit me, no matter how close it seemed like he was going to get to hitting me during that time period, and all I really had to worry about was getting gloomed when I was walking on his back, was kind of weird. And then if you fell off, Zelda just caught you and you just did it again. It was pretty anticlimactic comparatively to other boss fights of similar styles earlier in the game. Whenever you're fighting the boss of the wind temple, that was up way flying in the sky and having to fight something that's moving around and stuff. And the whole time I felt like it was like do or die. I was trying to like make really accurate hits and things like that. And I didn't get that feeling with the final boss battle. It was really more of a, all right, I got to check off a couple of things real quick before I see the final cutscene. There we go. Did it. And that was my one disappointment. It was a beautiful moment, good music. I liked the two dragons flying around each other and stuff. It just didn't feel like I was in even a slight amount of danger, which made me wonder what the point was.
Yeah, and you aren't. By the time I got there, I was just sort of like, oh, okay. Like, I went into that thinking this is going to be one step down from a playable cutscene. So I wasn't super disappointed by that, because it's like, okay, this is a spectacle moment because I've spent 200 hours getting here and I need some eye candy. But yeah, now that you mentioned
what they should have done to give the exact, I'm sorry, you made me think of it by saying that. The spectacle, the eye candy. You land on Zelda, and instead of it being where you're jumping off of Zelda and landing on him, and if you fall off, Zelda catches you, Link grabs onto Zelda's horns, and she starts firing light lasers out of her face. Yes. And you're just, like, doing this awesome, like, flying laser dogfight. It's really easy. You don't have to worry about energy or getting hurt or anything, but the pure spectacle of like lasers and explosions and stuff at the end probably would have been a little more climactic than I landed on his back and I poked him in his eyeballs.
I'm going to go a step further. You do that, and you have to complete that to open him up so that you can land on him and stab his parts. And it's like you're alternating between the two. I was really surprised that I could not control Zelda. It's like, oh, I just jump off and okay, cool, fine, whatever. Yep. But no, it should have been one of those things where like you have like that spectacle moment, and then you had to jump onto him.
And then Andros comes out, and you realize,
exactly.
Like, whoa, this is Star Fox 3.
Most ambitious crossover of all time. Because, in the Onimusha games, which are essentially samurai Resident Evil made by Capcom, the very, very, very end of, I think, 2 or 3 of them, legitimately is at the end of the game, after you finish the boss fight, they just turn on the main character's Super Saiyan mode, and you just get to go full ham, just shooting lasers and explosions and stuff. And yeah, there's zero chance you're going to lose this fight, but it feels dope when it's happening, because you're just like, and I think that would have been a cool way.
But but let's actually talk about not the final battle, but the ending after it. So, yeah, Zelda stops being a dragon because time travel and holy magic, when combined, cures dragons.
And love.
It is power of love.
It is quite funny to me that the only thing we know about dragons is that you're immortal and you cannot be turned back, and yet in the final scene, you kill a dragon and turn a dragon back into a normal person.
Link should have used recall. and like all the sages pool their energy to like help him do this really powerful recall or something.
That would have been cool, and turn Ganondorf back into a normal Ganon, and then like knock him out and kill him that way or something, and then turn Zelda into a normal person again. But it would have been 10,000 years of recall, so that would have been pretty wild. But yeah, there's definitely some cooler ways than just, I stabbed him in the head and he died. I thought dragons couldn't die. Shut up. Anyway, I used some magic and she turned back into a person. I thought she couldn't ever turn back into a person. Shut up. Anyway.
Anyway, so yeah, it felt like a bit of a cop-out, and then the after-credits scene was just like so...
Friendship.
Yeah, it's so inconsequential. It's like, okay, this isn't really setting up anything. This isn't setting up a further story. It's just like, yeah, we pledged to defend Hyrule. Yeah, no, duh!
Yeah.
You don't think it's setting up a story, but here's the thing. Who was there? Minoru left, right? Mm-hmm. And then you've got the other sages, and you've got Link, and you've got Zelda. There's one more character present, a very important character that tells you exactly why they're pledging themselves to Zelda there at the end of the story. Do you know who that character was?
Navi.
Purah. That's right. They've cured death. They have immortality. Queen Zelda for all of eternity. The sages to rule with an iron fist as they all continue to just force their wills upon the people, because no one can stop her, because if she gets old, Purah just turns her young again, and she just keeps going until she slowly goes insane, and the sages have sworn themselves to her, and they too are immortal because of Purah, and they can't stop themselves because they have these good memories about how she spent 10,000 years protecting them all as a dragon, but oh no, there's nothing we can do. The universe is doomed because of the evil Queen Zelda.
And then Andros pops out.
I was thinking, this sounds kind of like 40K. More 40,000.
That was amazing. Nicely done. So, Glenn.
Yes.
What did you think about this game?
So, I don't know if I've ever said this on Two Bots and Crew. So, you're going to have to take my word that I've been saying this for the past 2 or 3 years. But I have a conclusion I drew about Breath of the Wild was the game was ultimately incomplete. That's what Breath of the Wild felt like to me, is, when I look back on it, it's like, this is a game that spent forever in development, and Nintendo was not doing well. They really needed a hit, so they said, it's good enough, polish it up, push it out the door, we need a hit. And it works. Tears of the Kingdom is the game Breath of the Wild should have been when it released. It feels like the completed version, with just the caves and the system that allows you to work around the limitations of the breakable weapons and all the dungeons and stuff. Well, I mentioned some parts of it feel less intentional because of the reused map. I think this is ultimately the best version of Breath of the Wild, and I think it is a much, much better game. Having said that, I'm not sure I ever want to play it ever again, because my gosh, this game was long. And it's a game, it's like, this was a great game that really outstayed its welcome. For perspective, I played Yakuza 0 and I completed all the side stories in Yakuza 0. Yakuza 0 is a big game with a lot of stuff to do, much like Tears of the Kingdom, excuse me. And that took me just over 100 hours. And as I mentioned before, I spent over 200 in this game. And I really hope the next Zelda game... My hope for the next Zelda game is that we have a map that's about 60% of the size. They work on some of the stuff of like rewarding the player with more like intrinsic power, like giving the player more abilities as they play, which is something I've been saying forever. And the Sages were a good attempt at that, but it was not... It was a very clumsy implementation of that idea, and the abilities were not terribly useful on their own. But yeah, no, it is definitely a step in the right direction. I think it's a much better game than Breath of the Wild, and I actually enjoyed it quite a lot. And for the first, I would say first 75% of my playtime, Well, no, actually, I should say I got about 50 hours in. I was going to do the Rito Temple, and I remember thinking, oh gosh, this is going to just drag on forever, isn't it? So that's my major issue is I think it's a great game, but I think it's too big and it outstays its welcome.
Is it your game of the year? Or do you have a favorite from 2023 otherwise?
I did not get to play a lot of games in 2023 because of Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
And I resent Tears of the Kingdom for that. So I would say right now, I'm having a hard time making time, like forcing myself to sit down and play it, but I think I honestly prefer Super Mario Brothers Wonder. Super Mario Brothers Wonder feels more like an evolution on Super Mario World and what it was trying to accomplish than any of the new Super Mario Brothers games. Even the ones that are like, oh, look, we brought back like the non-linear map from Super Mario World. Like it just has the creativity and all of the like, you know, you're seeing weird new sites because Dinosaur Island was not the Mushroom Kingdom. But we're not here to talk about that game. So yeah, Tears of the Kingdom is it's a great game. But I just I grew frustrated because I think Nintendo honestly made all of us bite off more than we could chew, or at least I bit off more than I could chew with that game. And I'm really, really hoping that the next game is smaller and more focused and focuses more on quality rather than quantity.
Thanks. All right, Nathan, give us your wrap up.
All right. I think that it is one of my favorite games of all time. I give it an easy 9.8 out of 10. Those two statements may sound like they're conflicting, but I think a 10 out of 10 would be a perfect game, and I don't think that exists, so it's pretty high up there. I think that of Zelda games, it is probably tied with Majora's Mask for me, and Majora's Mask is maybe my favorite game of all time, and I know there's a bunch of nostalgia tied up in that, so I think that means that this one might be better, but I'm not 100% sure. I do think that it could be improved. I agree a lot with Glen on how it is what Breath of the Wild should have been. And I think that the thing that it is lacking is just a little more direction as far as, I think if it was a smaller game, but there was more content there as far as what makes Majora's Mask so amazing for me is the fact that every character has so many unique interactions and has so much personality and has a whole schedule that they're on. And those sorts of things are always truly impressive to me. And I think that if you could implement that sort of idea in more characters in Tears of the Kingdom, I get it's a giant game, so that'd be very difficult. That's why you make it smaller. And make interactions with other characters feel more organic and real and feel like they're real people instead of generic villager walking number 3. It would be pretty much a perfect game. Slightly smaller and add that in. For me, I think that it just hit really, really a lot of the buttons that I needed it to push for it to be an amazing experience for me and scratched a lot of itches. And I could definitely see it taking too much time to get through if I hadn't just entered the Matrix for 3 weeks and just did it all at once. Did I miss a lot of sleep? Yes. Did I enjoy doing it? Yes. Am I planning on doing that more in the future? Yes. So, I think that kind of sums it up for me of that between all of the ways that things interact with each other and just the sheer enjoyment out of goofy nonsense fun that I have with it, which is my favorite type of video game fun, honestly, is goofy nonsense fun. That it's hard for me to think of another game doing a better job at a lot of those things. So yeah, I truly love the game. It's definitely my game of the year, and I played Baldur's Gate 3 a decent amount, although not near as much as I want to, so it still definitely has an opportunity for me to change my mind on that in the next 14 days. But I highly doubt that it will, being that even though I am a huge D&D fan, and so it will scratch a lot of itches as well, I think the true freedom that you really get from a game like this is definitely worth it, and the community it created, because as I've said, getting to watch people online create ridiculous things and figure out more and more about it and dive into what makes the game tick and make new things happen has been just a real pleasure. And it also is cool that just other members of my family who don't really play video games just walk into the room and say, whoa, wait, how does that work? Why is the game able to do that? It's just been a really cool thing. And people who haven't even been interested in video games before have messed around with it because of how unique and interesting and fun the systems are that are in play. So I think it's a great game. I love it. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to go plug myself back into the Matrix.
That's awesome. And I'm really glad to hear that your itches finally got scratched. That's good. That can be very bothersome when they're not. Well, I'm similar to you guys. I loved this game. I played 100 hours and then some. Loved all of it, especially when I was in it. Maybe a little bit less when I was like, why was I just doing that? Why am I so worried about getting every piece of armor? But I'm proud of Nintendo for pulling this off. I think it's a true feat of video game development and a defining game of the generation. It does get my game of the year. I also really loved Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I'll be revisiting Wonder more, that's for sure. Just because of its approachability and what you can accomplish in it with short chunks and its multiplayer aspects and stuff. I also haven't gotten to play enough of WarioWare Move It, but that could also be a big contender this year because over the years I've just come to find that WarioWare is really one of my favorite series ever. Pound for pound with like just pure fun. So I recently rebought WarioWare Twisted. I'm happy to have that piece of my childhood back in my possession.
There's that goofy nonsense fun I was talking about.
Exactly. But just for pure epicness and scale and scope, definitely got to give it to Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm glad that we were able to put aside this much time to talk about such an epic game and devote our final episode of the Two Button Crew podcast to this. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is the final episode, and this is the final piece of Two Button Crew content, which is pretty wild to say. Two Button Crew on this channel started back on May 21st, 2015. First video that Simeon and I uploaded was called The Nintendo World Championship Returns. That was episode 1, and we went for over 800 episodes, uploading every weekday, just talking about all the latest Nintendo stuff. But I've rewatched the first several episodes recently and just had a fun time doing that. I think something that kind of set Two Button Crew apart was that we created content in a way that was very evergreen. So even though we're not going to be making new podcasts and new videos, so many of those episodes are still just as fun to go back to and watch, and they'll always be there on YouTube, which is awesome. So I think a lot of Nintendo YouTubers these days are basically just making news videos, and they're doing a great job. They're killing it, but we didn't grow as fast because we were maybe not talking always about the newest things, but we were just talking about whatever was fun for us. Or, I mean, what do I have here? History of the Virtual Boy. We made that in 2015. Who else was talking about the Virtual Boy in 2015? So all that to say is the backlog is there for you guys. And yeah. Glenn, I'm sure you have some closing thoughts on Two Button Crew as a whole as well, right?
Yeah. So, Two Button Crew has been a really, it's weird how you kind of sign up for something. Heck, and I didn't even realize when I agreed to join Two Button Crew that I was going to be doing content regularly. I thought I was just I was asked to be a guest contributor for one article. And then, I've told this story before, but I was asking Scott, which of these articles do you think would be best for the blog? And he says, just do all of them. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, that's what I agreed to. But, Yeah, Two Button Crew has been, it's one of those things where it's kind of crazy for me to think about, because I think it's genuinely something that is going to be like one of those things that was never super successful. We I don't think we ever broke 2,000 subscribers.
Mm-mm.
But not successful. There are different definitions of success, but it never blew up. It never took off. But the thing is, I think that this has been like foundational to me realizing, because one of the things is it's really hard to put yourself out there, because you think that, oh, what if everybody hates me and then I'm just known for this one thing that everybody hates. And, I've put stuff out there that people didn't like. I've put stuff out there that people did like. And the thing I realized is that through Two Button Crew is that people actually are interested in what I have to say. They are interested in my thoughts and my opinions. And, that as someone who wants to like make video games for a living, who's basically peddling his thoughts to people, not in the same sense as like a podcast would, but, it's not necessarily peddling my opinions like on a podcast, but coming up with stuff in my head and putting it out there in the public space for people to see, and getting to have that experience of doing that and people responding positively to it. I honestly think that I'm way more comfortable doing that, like undertaking business ventures and stuff like that, just because I've already done it through Two Button Crew, and Two Button Crew offered me kind of a safe place to do it. And the other thing that Two Button Crew taught me is that if you screw up and you put something out there that's not that great, probably no one's even going to pay attention in the first place.
Well, you were an amazing partner to have through this journey, and you have carried Two Button Crew for the last couple of years when our video show shut down and you wanted to keep the podcast running. So I appreciate that. You did a lot of legwork with the prep and the editing and the outlining and every aspect. So I'm thankful for you taking that responsibility from me. Also glad that you got that experience as well. I think it will continue to serve you. And yeah, just thankful for your support. And on that topic, I wanted to shout out some of our...
wait, hang on. I know Nathaniel is an honorary member of the crew, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank him for basically being my enabler when you weren't around.
Yep.
Of course, I've enjoyed my time with the crew. It's been a lot of good times. It's great to build stronger relationships with you guys and make new friends. And
to be honest, we weren't really friends. I don't mean that in a harsh way, but
right.
We weren't really friends before doing Two Button Crew.
Right, yeah, we met via my YouTube channel because of my wife, essentially. So that's such a funny, like, roundabout way for us to, like, become acquaintances, but then we became friends through doing a podcast, which is pretty wild. So I really appreciated getting the opportunity to be on here. I am sad to see it go. Obviously, doesn't have near as much to do with me as it does with you guys, but I have grown to appreciate being a part of this group and getting to have a place where I can try to talk out some of the ways that I think about some games and stuff like that. So it has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you guys giving me a platform to do that on and getting to hang out with you guys. And we'll definitely have to figure out ways to interact outside of this in the future, because I don't see any reason why I wouldn't want to be around you guys anymore after we're done with this. So
yes.
Thanks a bunch.
Yep. And just to keep the gratitude train chugging along here, I would be remiss not to go over this short list of shout outs. So these are friends that we made along the way. We always had the best comment section, the most supportive people, both with their time, financially, on Patreon, all that. Crazy K, Dan Tappan, Enrique Lopez, Flapjack, Game Over Jesse, J-Man, Leap, Matthew Mason, Paul Washke, Rachel Wakelin, Sai, Sparkling Cyanide, Thierry, and T-Mac Music. Also, I'm positive that I'm missing some people, but my memory is so bad. And of course, I'm talking about friends over 800 plus videos. So, these people that I've mentioned here are just some of the most faithful and people that I will definitely miss interacting with. But I'm not disappearing off the face of the earth. I might be working with Nintendo Force Books in the future, so keep an eye on that outlet. If that doesn't work out, then obviously still check them out. They're putting out great books like The Impact of Iwata. But yeah, Lucas and I are talking about some ideas. On the topic of books, my second novel is out, Gates of Eternity. It's a continuation of my first novel, Spire of Tyranny, so those are there if you enjoy fantasy fiction. And then I'm looking to go to a retro video game convention being put on by Retro Rick in Conway, Arkansas. I know it's maybe a random place for a lot of people, but Retro Rick is one of my favorite YouTubers now. He's
Arkansas,
awesome.
That's not that far from Oklahoma.
Well, what are you doing Saturday, October 12th and Sunday, October 13th? Maybe check it out. So if anybody's there, we might be able to meet up. But all that to say that we'll see each other around one way or another. So thanks for all of your support over the years, to everybody listening and to everyone who has been part of the crew. All right. Well, love you guys.
And thank you very much for listening to the Two Button Crew podcast.
Goodbye.
Bye.